This page of N64 Mag, right, is a classic front cover. Big red N64 logo as you expect. It's shouting about games galore and Link from Zelda and Banjo-Kazooie being the big hitters coming out of E3. Remember E3? Those were the days. But Nuka, there's a big splash for Rare's Jet Force Gemini first ever pictures it says, which was a massive deal back then. Everyone was gagging for a new Rare game, especially after GoldenEye. Street Fighter's return is blazoned across the page as well, Capcom finally showing their N64 hand. Must have been Street Fighter Alpha 2 or something like that. Or maybe even Street Fighter 3 was being teased, can't quite recall. And of course it's promising, over 30 pages of tips inside. They're listing a few games for tips, like Forsaken, which was that sci-fi shooter, WCW vs NWO World Tour for the wrestling fans, World Cup 98 fever was clearly kicking in, and Quake 64 getting a guide to secret areas. Always needed a bit of help with Quake 64's murky levels. Down at the bottom there's a bit about Japanese and US news and reviews, plus little pics for Pocket Monsters Stadium, probably Pokemon Stadium in the UK, and Bomberman Hero, both decent games in their own right. All in all, a pretty standard mid-98 N64 mag cover, promising all the latest news and tips. Good times. This page of N64 Magazine is having a bit of a laugh really, isn't it? GoldenEye 2 on the bag. Nothing in the mag. Odd. Bit cheeky. They're talking about how they can't give their Star Game Award out easily. They actually play them properly first, before deciding if it's any good. Makes sense, I suppose. They're bragging about being independent from Nintendo so they can give honest reviews, even if a game is rubbish, which is fair enough. You want to know if your hard-earned cash is being spent wisely. It mentions they cover Japanese and American games early too, so you know what's coming over here. Always good to get the heads up. They reckon they're experienced Nintendo fans writing the mag. Well, you'd hope so. They're trying to cram in useful info and advice, which is what you want really. The main article seems to be about GoldenEye 2, but then they drop a bomb and say it's actually called Perfect Dark. Bit of a swerve. Apparently, Tomorrow Never Dies licensing got in the way, which is a bit of a pain. But they say it's still using the GoldenEye engine and is a sequel in spirit. Shooting, stealth, the usual GoldenEye stuff, but with a completely original story and characters because of the license thing. They sound pretty chuffed with Perfect Dark, and rightly so looking back, that game was amazing. Then there's talk of another Rare game, a mystery one, Jet Force Gemini. They say it's not a beat-em-up or a killer app rumor, but a third-person shooter with incredible graphics. Sounds promising. They were bigging up the graphics like nothing else, mind you. They always did in mags back then. Poor old Tim from the mag is mentioned. Apparently he's exhausted from E3 in Atlanta. Says he had to take a laptop and modem. Imagine that. He was stuck in his hotel room reporting on games while everyone else was partying. They joke he set a world record for sleeping. Poor bloke was probably knackered. They mention Banjo-Kazooie is coming next month, and they've got a pre-production copy sitting there. They could have rushed a review for this issue, but they want to spend a couple of weeks with it first. Sensible approach. Review coming on July 15th apparently, around the PAL release. There's a big picture of Banjo-Kazooie from E3. Looks bright and colourful, as you'd expect from Rare. And that's your lot for this page. Enjoy the issue, they say. Standard stuff. This page is the contents of an old N64 magazine, issue 17 from July 98. Right on the cover, Banjo-Kazooie, biggest game of the summer apparently, with a special investigation, page 32. Then Perfect Dark, also a special investigation on page 40. Asking if it's GoldenEye 2 or something different, very mysterious. There's also a section on Live, from E3 Feet 98, covering all the news and games from that show, page 44. Moving on to the reviews in N64 Arena, GT64, they reckon the wait for a decent driving game is still on. Buster Move 2 and Dual Heroes also get a look in. And Aero Gauge, apparently it smells of fish in PAL regions. Regional differences, eh? Then there's Import Arena, with Japanese and American games, Bomberman Hero, Kobe Bryant's NBA Courtside, and Power Pro Baseball 5, described as baseball and RPG being Japanese oddness, which is probably about right. This page is the contents page for the magazine, right at the start. They're hyping up what's coming in future N64 games, with a section called Future Look. Looks like they're giving a first peek at Jet Force Gemini that's rare, so you know it'll be something special. They call it an all-new game from them, and it's supposed to be stunning. There's also Turok 2 back, with more claws and teeth apparently, and something called Space Circus, which is space travel in a 25th century big top, whatever that means, sounds a bit odd. Then you've got the N64 How-To section, guides to get you through tough bits of games. They're covering escaping, Forsaken the hard way, grappling to victory in WCW vs NWO. Surprising depth in that one apparently, and lots of spandex naturally. Then there's winning the trophy in World Cup 98, wondering if England or Scotland can actually win it in the game. and finally discovering every last secret in Quake, the final part of their guide. Planet 64 is the news bit. Sounds like they've got all the big stories straight from E3, Capcom news, a new piece of important gaming kit, and Nintendo helping out with a British film, and Paul's Plant even gets a look in too, maybe Robert Plant, who knows. Coming soon section mentions Wipeout, F1 Racing, Extreme G2, and Shadowman. Apparently, the cream of the E3 crop gets a thorough look. There are 2 all-new games from Japan as well, so they're keeping an eye on imports. There's a win section. They're giving away an N64 and 3 games if you send them something American, or if you already have the console, 6 games instead. Cheeky, Jaya. And then the regular bits at the bottom: information station, tips extra, N64 shopper, Club 64, right into the mag in Club 64, subscriptions, back issues, directory, and a look at what's coming in the next issue of N64 Magazine, issue 18. All the usual monthly stuff then. This page is taking a gander at what the N64 had coming up back in '98, with a future look feature. Blimey, feels like a lifetime ago. The big game they're pushing is Jet Force Gemini, a new shoot-'em-up from Rare, those cheeky devils. Seems like the reviewer wasn't blown away, giving it a 6 out of 10 and just calling it a brand new shoot-'em-up. Not exactly setting the world on fire, is it? They've got some screenshots dotted about, talking about pretty explosions, and enemies getting ripped to bits, and something about the main character having cute pigtails. Right, okay. There's also a mention of a mystic stone circle that's supposed to remind you of Glastonbury, which is a bit random. Apparently, you'll be fighting giant ants, classic game fodder in it, and the weapons effects are supposedly top-notch. Maybe the most spectacular there's ever been, according to them. A bit strong, perhaps. They also mention Lupus, who they're wondering if it's a dog or some kind of evil little yappy poodle type thing. Sounds charming. And it seems different types of these ant blighters react differently to your weapons, so some strategy involved, maybe. Aside from Jet Force Gemini, they also give a quick shout out to Turok 2, giving it an 8 and saying it looks mighty scary and loads of fun. And Space Circus gets a whopping 10 out of 10 and is called a huge new space adventure from Infogrames. Bit generous maybe, but hey, it's their magazine. If you wanted more game news, apparently there was loads more in the issue. Previews on page 16. Special investigations, from page 32, and an E3 Feat 98 report, on page 44. Right then, let's move on. This page is all about Jet Force Gemini. Looks like a preview and future look. It's definitely aiming to be a proper big game. They are calling it a no ordinary shoot-'em-up. Rare are behind it, so you know it's going to be polished. They're saying it's coming to the Nintendo 64, obviously. Warrington Norsa, they reckon Rare, after doing well with Diddy Kong Racing and GoldenEye, are trying their hand at this shoot-'em-up genre, but in 3D like Mario. They mention Contra and games like that for the classic SNES, saying Jet Force Gemini is in that style but brought up to date. Dore. It's got 3 characters apparently, Juno, Vela and Lupus, who's a dog. Each one has different skills and weapons, and you'll need to use them all, as some areas are only for certain characters, so it sounds like you'll be swapping about a bit. Lupus, being a dog, will sniff out secrets and get through small gaps, makes sense. They mention 2-player co-op, and even 4-player split-screen deathmatch, which sounds like a proper laugh back in the day. Graphically, they are proper chuffed with it, calling them absolutely incredible, saying they are using realistic light sourcing for things like searchlights and shadows, proper next-gen stuff, for the N64 at the time I suppose. They even mention cutscenes and an orchestral soundtrack to give it a cinematic feel. Blimey, ambitious. They reckon if it all goes to plan, Jet Force Gemini could be as important for shoot-'em-ups as Mario 64 was for platform games. Bit of a bold claim, but they do seem impressed. They finish off saying to be continued, so it's just a preview and they'll try and get more info and tell us first. Those were the days of waiting for the next issue to see more about a game you were looking forward to. This page is a look at Turok 2, back in '98. Seems like they were showing it off at E3. Remember the first Turok? That was a bit of a system seller for the N64 at the time, felt properly next-gen with all those polygons and dinosaurs. Then GoldenEye came along, and kind of stole its thunder a bit with the whole espionage thing and proper multiplayer. Anyway, this article is saying Turok 2 is on its way, and Iguana, the developers, are promising more of everything. More weapons, up from 14 to 25, including special underwater ones apparently, which sounds interesting. They mention proximity fragmentation mines, and a spiked knuckle duster. A spiked knuckle duster in a dinosaur game, you gotta laugh. The levels are meant to be bigger and less. About tricky platforming, thank goodness. Level 3 in the first game was a bit much, wasn't it? More puzzle solving this time, which could be good or could be a pain. Sounds like you have to search every inch of the levels to get through, finding keys or weapons and such, to open up new areas. They're banging on about the gore too, saying there's blood everywhere, livestock corpses and blood-smeared walls, very graphic for the time. And they're really pushing the multiplayer, especially the deathmatch, which they reckon is trying to beat GoldenEye at its own game. They mention a hunt mode, which is 3 players against 1, sounds a bit different. Overall, it seems like they're trying to make Turok 2 bigger and better, more weapons, more enemies, 45 types now apparently, and more gore. We'll see if it lives up to the hype, won't we? This page from N64 Magazine. Right, it's all about Turok 2, Seeds of Evil, a game that's looking rather tasty, isn't it? There's this massive T-Rex front and center, looking like it could swallow you whole, which is probably the point. It says here it's bigger than Turok himself, and anything we've seen on the N64 so far, which is a bold claim considering what we've already seen. Warrington Norcus. They're talking about a new multiplayer mode called Threeome, where 3 players, armed, hunt down 1 unarmed player until they reach a safe spot, then the roles reverse. Sounds a bit like tag with guns really, but might be a laugh. Then there's the usual bloodlust mode, classic deathmatch, and team mode for 4 players battling Primogen's armies. Primogen, apparently, is the new bad guy, woken up from his underground spaceship. Right then, the screenshots show off some rather moody looking levels, bit misty in places, and some exploding minecarts, which is always good for a bit of chaos. They also mention the environments are quite different from GoldenEye, with platform jumping, holes in the floor, and even underwater sections. Trying to be a bit more than just shooting corridors then, are they? Rugoku. Tim's E3 notes are there too, saying there was 1 playable level, and another boss level. He describes some thin pink tubes hanging from the ceiling and pulsating things. Sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? He mentions a great sniper mode like MDK, and that you can zoom right into enemies and see the color of their skin. Fantastic apparently. Release date is down as October for both the US and UK, so not too long to wait then to see if this dino hunting sequel lives up to the hype. They reckon it might even give GoldenEye a run for its money, which is fighting talk, isn't it? We'll see about that. This page is having a look at Space Circus, one of Infogrames' big new titles back then on the N64. Apparently, it had been in development for ages at their Lyon studio, about 3 years, so you'd hope it was going to be a bit special. They're calling it a huge new space adventure, and it does sound a bit bonkers, story-wise. You play as Starshot, this genetically engineered space soldier bloke, who's a bit nutty but can fire lightning bolts from his hands and steer comets with his mind, or thought power as they call it. Typical programmer stuff, eh? Still, sounds like a laugh. Or, graphically they're saying it's top-notch for the N64, proper 3D, and you can see for miles, none of that pop-up fog you sometimes got, which was always a pain. Apparently the camera could be a bit fiddly, but they were hoping to sort that out. Graphically out. There are 7 massive worlds in the game to explore, and they've listed a few of them. Tensons, which is supposed to be like a holiday planet, then Killer Expo, a trade fair, Primitron, a Stone Age theme park, and Ultima Crash, which sounds a bit dodgy, like a Bermuda Triangle kind of place. You'll be meeting all sorts of weirdos in these places, like giant sharks and grumpy toddlers on Tensons, lunatic generals and robot soldiers at Killer Expo, killer wasps and imitation Tarzans on Primitron, and ghosts and space dogs in Ultima Crash. Sounds like a right mixed bag. They reckon the main bloke, Starshot, is a bit strange compared to some of the other characters, and they mention some names like Kill Kill and Super Sponge as examples of less odd characters. They also mention you get a robot called Willful, who acts as an interpreter, and a rocket called Willy. It's looking like a proper colourful and wacky N64 game, the kind we were all quite keen on at the time, something a bit different to blast through after school. Let's hope it lived up to the hype when it eventually came out. This page is about Space Circus, or RCUS Clown Jewel as it's called here. Looks like a new platformer coming to the N64. Reading through it, the story is about the Space Circus going bust, and needing to capture new acts from different planets. Classic stuff really. They've previewed an early version, and reckon it's got some good ideas, and the graphics look decent, very colourful and cartoony. They even mention it being like Banjo, so it's clearly trying to compete with the big boys. The controls sound a bit fiddly for the camera though, which is never a good sign in a 3D platformer. They've got some screenshots of the game in action from different levels called Earth, Technomum, and Virtuous Circus. Earth looks like a ruined city with Martians, Technomum is all about machines, and Virtuous Circus is the rival circus, naturally. It seems like you play as Starshot, this orange chap with big ears, and you're going around collecting new acts and facing off against the Virtuous Circus. It's down as an October release, both here and in the States, so we'll see if it lives up to the hype when it finally arrives. assuming it gets a bit of polish before then. They'll be keeping an eye on it over the summer apparently. This page from N64 Magazine, issue 17 July 1998, it's all about the Electronic Entertainment Expo, E3 as it was known back then, and it was a massive deal, the biggest video game show on Earth apparently, held in Atlanta. They're saying N64 was right at the front of the queue, which is fair enough. It was the hot console at the time. Sounds like it was a bit of a madhouse. Dazzlingly bright, ear-bleedingly loud and horrendously busy is how they describe it. Nintendo, bless 'em, apparently threw up some surprises on the N64 front. They mentioned Zelda 64, or Ocarina of Time as we know it now, and apparently people were queuing for ages to get a go on one of the 10 playable screens. 10 screens for the whole of E3. Can you imagine? Ciao. They were raving about F-Zero X as well, saying it was utterly brilliant and creatively breathtaking. Not actually seen much of that myself at the time, but it was meant to be fast. And then there was Perfect Dark, the GoldenEye follow-up, which they couldn't believe was running on the N64. Looked too good to be true apparently, proper fancy graphics for the time. They also mentioned 12 Tales, Conker 64, which became just Conker's Bad Fur Day later on, and Turok 2, Seeds of Evil, so it was all go on the N64 front. Seems like they had a sneak peek at Turok 2 behind closed doors with the project manager David Dienspier, fancy that. Good times, simpler times, eh? Just reading about all these games makes you think back to being a kid again, waiting for these titles to come out. Good memories. This page is a bit of a roundup of stuff from E3. Kicking off with a shortcuts section, there's talk of some French TV channel doing video games, which sounds a bit naff, doesn't it? Then there's something about a Donkey Kong cartoon on Fox Kids Network, drawn from SNES games. Who actually gets Fox Kids Network though? They're dying to know if anyone's seen it. Bit desperate, aren't they? Then there's a piece called Capcom Confirm. Apparently Capcom finally revealed what they're doing on the N64 after keeping it all hush-hush at E3. Turns out Resident Evil, Street Fighter and Mega Man are coming, which are fair enough, expected really. But get this, they're also doing Tichu, Warrington Norsa, a Disney Tetris game. Talk about scraping the barrel. Apparently Nintendo thought Capcom's games were a bit too violent, so they went for a cheerful Disney Tetris. Right you are. There are some pictures dotted around, like one of Link from Zelda, naturally. Below that, there's a mention of Quake 2 on PC being perfect and dark, and then they reckon Perfect Dark is indeed perfect and dark too. Well, that's encouraging. Shadow Man is mentioned as a third-party game to watch out for, and it's got a moody London Underground section, which sounds interesting, even if they think it might get censored. They've also had a look at V-Rally 64, which they say is fast and crisp, and Top Gear Overdrive, which apparently isn't shabby. Heaven is looking good, and F1 World Grand Prix looks amazing, even better than the PlayStation 1. Sounds like they're impressed with that. Wipeout 64 and Rogue Squadron are mentioned as looking promising too, and SCARS could be interesting as well. Seems like there's a lot to look forward to on the old N64. Lastly, there's a bit about Paul's plant in the office getting some fertilizer. Thrilling stuff. And right at the bottom it says A to Z of E3, a full report on page 44. So if you want the full lowdown, you gotta flick over there. Looks like a busy E3 for the N64 then. Lots of games on the way. This page then kicks off with a bit about the Game Boy camera and printer finally coming out over here in July. 40 quid each, can you believe it? Bit steep for what it is, but back then these add-ons were the must-have gadgets. Apparently they shifted over 500,000 of them already in Japan. Mental, isn't it? Then there's a moan about the 64DD being delayed again. Something about software problems and Nintendo saying we probably won't see it this year. Color me surprised. And a quick note about Fanzine Farm being put on hold this month because of Tim whatever he's been up to. The main article is about Mario going to Hollywood. Seems a bit mad, but apparently Nintendo are getting involved with some British film called Virtual Sexuality. Sounds a bit dodgy, doesn't it? Apparently it's a comedy about a teenage girl who creates a virtual boyfriend, and Mario himself is going to be in it, doing some meet and greets at some Nintendo stand. They reckon the film is a mix of weird science and a Britpop Clueless, and it's got Laura Fraser in it, who was in Small Faces apparently. They were trying to get an interview with Mario himself at Elstree Studios, bless them. Sounds like a right laugh, if a bit daft. They seem pretty chuffed that Nintendo is getting involved with something fashionable, as they put it, like Sony doesn't have a monopoly on cool games. Film is meant to be out in November, and it's a 15 certificate, so not exactly aimed at kids, is it? Down at the bottom they've got new goods. First up is this N64 passport thing. It's a converter cart so you can play games from any region on your N64. Bit like an action replay, but for region locking, I suppose. They reckon it's dead easy to use and works a treat, getting an 84% score. You can even get cheat codes off the internet for it. Fancy that. Do to we. And then there's the ASC2 Wheel 64. Looks a bit cheap and cheerful, doesn't it? Apparently it's a steering wheel without any pedals, which is a bit weird. They reckon it's alright for Top Gear Rally and Mario Kart, but not as good as the proper Nintendo controller, and it gets a 75%. They say it's a bit of alright if it's under £40, but the standard Nintendo pad still rules the roost, as far as they are concerned. Fair enough, really. This page of Retro World, hosted by Jason Moore, is having a look back at some classic handheld electronic games. It's funny to think these things are considered retro now, makes you feel a bit old. First up is Galaxium by Bandai. Remember those little LED games? Proper basic but addictive back in the early 80s. Bright colors and loud noises, just like the arcade version they say. 81% not bad for a simple shooter. Boo-doo. Then there's Amidar, by Konami and Gakken. Maze games were everywhere back then. This one sounds a bit like Pac-Man but with monsters chasing you, and you get a jump button to get away. That sounds handy. 91% blimey, that's a high score. B. Next is Touch Me by Atari. Atari trying to get in on the handheld market, bless them. This one sounds like Simon, that memory game with lights and sounds, but Atari's version. 72%, a bit less exciting it seems. Warrington Norsa. Lastly for the retro handhelds it's Caveman by Tommy. Tommytronic games were quite good actually, simple graphics but playable. This caveman game you're stealing eggs and dodging lava. Sounds simple but they reckon it's good fun, giving it 76%. UA. Then the page flips to the future, or at least autumn 98, with a big advert for Earthworm Jim 3D. Crikey. They're still making Earthworm Jim games? The universe is back in safe. Warren's hands. Bit dramatic. Looks like it's coming to the N64, PC and PlayStation. Remember the first Earthworm Jim? Mental game that was. Hopefully this 3D one will be just as bonkers. Website address there if you're on the internet thingy. Seems to be an interplay game. Right, better get back to playing Mario 64 then. This page is all about upcoming N64 games. Looks like they're calling it Greed F. Bit of a strange title, eh? Seems like they're saying if you've been waiting for a decent racer, then blimey, 3 are coming at once. They're banging on about 3 new high-profile racing games from third parties that are taking on Nintendo's own F-Zero X. The main game they are previewing here is Wipeout 64. Apparently Psygnosis are really going for it and comparing it to F-Zero X, but reckon it's quite different in terms of gameplay and has its own cool style. They're saying it's like the PlayStation version but with fog to hide the pop-up, naturally, and it's supposed to be blisteringly fast. Sounds alright I suppose if you're into that sort of thing. They're also promising 4-player mode and a big-name soundtrack, which was always a big deal back then, wasn't it? Down the side there's a list of games they're featuring this month. Looks like Wipeout 64, Extreme G2, World Grand Prix, Earthworm Jim 3D, Shadowman, Buck Bumble, Glover, WWF Warzone, and Star Soldier, Vanishing Earth. Quite a mixed bunch really. There are a few screenshots of Wipeout 64, showing off the in-game action, times and positions and whatnot. One caption mentions the track detail being better than F-Zero X, and another is wondering what the weapon symbols are at the top of the screen. Clever clogs. Lastly, there's a little box called Tim's E3 Notes, where he's jotted down some quick thoughts from E3 Feet 98. He says Wipeout was lovely jubbly, whatever that means, and playable, with 1 track, and that it moved like greased lightning. Weapons and fog weren't in yet apparently, but he reckons it was rattling good fun in multiplayer. Sounds like he was quite impressed then, wasn't he? This page is from an N64 mag, looks like a preview section from E3 Feet 98. Right at the top we have Extreme G2 Feet from Acclaim. It seems like they're really pushing the boat out with this one, saying it's a massive jump from the original in graphics and gameplay. They're even banging on about needing a 4 MB memory expansion to get the full 640 by 480 hires experience, which was a big deal back then. Those memory packs were a bit of a con really, weren't they? Without it, it's apparently still better than the original, with Forsaken-style lighting and reflective surfaces. Ooh! And picture-in-picture missile camera view, fancy. They mention 12 tracks, each with 3 routes, new vehicles, weapons and a battle mode. The reviewer's wondering if it'll be a Wipeout beater. Bit ambitious, weren't we all? Then down below there's World Grand Prix. This one's from Paradigm, blimey. Remember them? Pilotwings 64, that was their claim to fame I guess. This is a Formula 1 racer, promising realistic handling and authentic visuals. They've apparently got all 17 tracks from the 1997 season, and are going on about detailed trackside objects and weather changes. Even the tunnel at Monaco, looking impressive. Replay mode is described as photorealistic, which probably means a bit blurry by today's standards, eh? They say it's a bit like a PlayStation racer perhaps, which is probably code for Ridge Racer ripoff maybe. It's got pit stops, weather affecting tyre choices, and refueling. 2-player mode, time trials, ghost car, and a scenario game where you try and change history. Sounds like a decent enough F1 game for the N64 to be fair. The reviewer says it looks like the Psygnosis F1 game, and is commendably fast, and the scenario mode is a brilliant idea. Well, we'll see about that, won't we? This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at Earthworm Jim 3D, or EWJ 3D as they're calling it, for the N64. It's got a big bold title, Tickle It Wriggler, which is very Jim, isn't it? They've slapped a Played It badge on there, so someone at the mag has actually had a go on it. It seems to be about collecting brain cells after a cow fell on Jim's head. Typical Earthworm Jim madness. They're talking about levels based on Jim's psyche, like fear and happiness, which sounds a bit bonkers, but in a good way for Jim. They mention old characters like Psychro and Evil the Cat are back, alongside new oddballs like Rabid Rabbit and Disco Zombies. Visually from the screenshots, it's definitely gone 3D, though Jim himself, bless him, still looks a bit like he's made out of pointy polygons. There's talk of 13 weapons, including armor-piercing flounders and a pacifying flower gun, which is just the kind of daft arsenal you'd expect. Apparently you can even pull stunts on your pig, which sounds interesting. They're making a big deal about the music being advanced and taking up a chunk of the N64's processing power, and composed by a world champion accordionist no less, which seems a bit much, doesn't it? The camera is mentioned, saying it zooms in and out, and bonus levels will be different. Like surfing and bowling in Earthworm Jim, you couldn't make it up. It's slated for a September release, they say. Overall, it sounds like they're aiming for the same kind of weird and wonderful humor as the 2D games, just in 3D. It's got that typical interplay craziness about it, so could be a laugh, could be a mess, who knows with Earthworm Jim. This page is all about the upcoming Shadow Man game for the N64. Blimey, remember that one? Video game nasty is the headline, setting the tone. In it, looks like they're pushing the horror angle proper, Makayuka. There's a breakdown at the top that says Acclaim/Iguana UK are doing it, 96, megs hefty for back then, and it's slated for November, in both the UK and US. So, a proper worldwide release, not like some of those dodgy imports we used to mess about with. Worry, they reckon it's going to be the darkest and most sense-baiting game ever on the N64. Bit strong, but hey, magazine hype, gotta love it. They mention sensitive features like electric chairs, zombies, crucifixes, serial killers, and buckets of rendered gore. Sounds like they're going for the shock factor. Gameplay-wise, they're calling it a mix of Resident Evil and Tomb Raider. Third-person shooting, but more flexible movement than Lara Croft. Mike Leroy and his alter ego Shadowman, switching between them New Orleans and the hellish dead side. Sounds a bit bonkers, doesn't it? Voodoo manuscripts and FBI profiles, quite a combo. The screenshots are properly gloomy, moody lighting, Barker-esque locations as they put it. One pic is definitely some dodgy-looking zombies, another some swampy area, and another looks like some kind of grim interior. They even comment that, even Paul wouldn't consider buying a place like this. Cheeky. Tim's E3 notes are there too. He's seen 10 levels apparently: London Tube Station, New York Wall, Woodland, Mental Asylum during a riot, all sorts of places then. He's banging on about the incidental detail. Insects flying around, bats and birds scattering. Says the difference between the PC 3DFX and N64 versions is negligible. Big claim that, back then. Taku. Overall, it's pushing Shadow Man as the must-have horror game for the N64 that November. Whether it lived up to the hype, well, that's another story, innit? But looking at this, they were certainly trying to make it sound like something proper gruesome and cutting edge. This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at Buck Bumble. Seems like Argonaut, those guys behind Star Fox on the SNES, or Riot Wars as we call it here, are making this one. They've just moved into new offices in North London apparently, and are finishing up work on it. It's their first game for the N64. They reckon it's come on loads, since they last showed it in issue 14. Apparently there's 20 levels in the final game. Sounds like it's a bit of a shoot-'em-up, with loads of different weapons and big explosions. They even compare it to Riot Wars in that respect, which is saying something. Weapons-wise, they mention a Quakish nail gun, and something that shoots lightning, plus missiles, some home in and others you guide yourself. Storyline is something about nuclear radiation and alien insects causing chaos. Level-wise, it starts in a garden setting, with giant flowers and stuff, then moves into sewers and even inside a house, all from a tiny bee's perspective of course. They reckon it's set for a September release, which isn't too far off now. There's a few screenshots, bits of gameplay really. You can see the bee buzzing around, bit dark looking in some of them, and the HUD with scores and things. One level is Mission 5, Water Purification, where you've got to eliminate all killer pillars whatever they are. Another screenshot mentions a trench level that's a bit like Star Wars, and something about evacuating because of a bomb, and one about a dragonfly game over screen with a big boom. There's a bit on the sound too, calling it the sound pound. Apparently they are busy doing the sounds for Buck Bumble, going for a speed garage style for the music. Nick Clark from Argonaut says they wanted a more adult sound, moving away from the usual plinky-plonk game music and using synths and some real-life sampling for the sound effects. Sounds alright, I suppose. This page has a look at a couple of upcoming games. First up is Glover. Seems to be a quirky platformer from Interactive Studios. They're calling it a dual-character platformer, comparing it to Banjo and Mario 64. Which is setting expectations pretty high, isn't it? Apparently you play as a glove, who can do normal platform stuff, but also control a ball which changes how you play. Sounds a bit Marble Madnessy. They mention different themed worlds, Pirate City, Carnival, Ice World, Alien Planet, standard stuff really. Tim from the magazine played it at E3 and thought it was very early and very odd, which doesn't exactly scream must-buy, does it? But Will reckons anything like Marble Madness is a good thing, bless him. Kira. Then we've got WWF Warzone, another wrestling game, this one from Acclaim and Iguana. It's WWF licensed, so you know what you're getting. They're banging on about photorealistic graphics, using pictures of wrestlers mapped onto the polygon models, which sounds alright I suppose, based on the screenshots shown here with Steve Austin and Shawn Michaels in a grapple. Apparently you can create a wrestler too, and they've got loads of body shapes and faces. They've listed a load of wrestlers that will be in it: Undertaker, Goldust, Mankind, Steve Austin, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, British Bulldog, Farouk, Ahmed, Rocky, Hunter and Shamrock. The usual suspects really. They are saying the game will have storyline elements as well, wrestlers breaking into matches, feuds and all that. Multiplayer for up to 4 players, co-op, tag and war modes, so standard wrestling fare. They're saying it's out in July. This page in N64 Magazine from back in '98, yeah, feels like a lifetime ago. Right then, let's have a look. First up, they're banging on about Star Soldier Vanishing Earth. Apparently it's this 64-bit revamp of a vertical scrolling shooter, proper old school stuff. Takahashi's the name behind it, some Japanese star producer, whoever he is. Story set in AD 2092, something about the SIA team, and fighting the Zeograd army. Sounds like your typical space blurb. They're talking up the graphics, transparency effects, massive explosions, all that jazz. Ships looking a bit nicked from Star Fox apparently. And a simulator mode, for the noobs. Nice touch. Sounds like it's promising some big boss battles, and loads of weapons to collect. Zaxxon fans are supposed to be excited, which is something. And they're getting all nostalgic about Axley, whatever that is, flooding back to the magazine office, bless 'em. Moving down, there's a bit called An Ear to the Ground. Bit of industry gossip really. Cora's showing off Fighting Force 64. Eidos has got more N64 games coming, which is hardly surprising. Innerloop, Norwegian developers, they're doing some extreme sports game, snowboarding and all that. Argonaut, remember them? Apparently they've got a couple of N64 projects, Buck Bumble and something called Chaos, and a spy versus spy game looking for a publisher. Right, good luck with that one. Seems some of the rare lads have jumped ship to form their own company, Eighth Wonder, and at least one's already legged it to Sony. Drama. Konami are distributing Titus's Virtual Chess after doing Aero Fighters Assault, make of that what you will. And get this, Blizzard are converting StarCraft for the N64. Command and Conquer like sprite-based game apparently, might be a technical headache. Nintendo's Howie Lincoln is happy about it for a '99 release. And lastly in this bit, 3DO are doing Army Men. Based on the plastic toy soldiers, tabletop strategy jobby. You can even melt them with a magnifying glass in the game, apparently. Right then. And Capcom signed up Robotech, which apparently someone had nightmares about from E3 '97, so they're keeping quiet about it for now. Then at the bottom, Payback Time, for a game called Winback by Koei. Sounds a bit like Metal Gear Solid or something. Terrorist fighting, military lark, hero and heroine, all that. Arsenal of weapons is supposed to be a bit overkill. Rocket launchers, machine guns, shotguns, the usual. Apparently the big guy with the shotgun is a bit Terminator 2, naturally. Backgrounds are minimalist, but the character animation system is supposed to be top-notch. Lots of motion sequences. And they've given the baddies names like Bigfoot, Grunt, and Lunatic Dyke. Charming. Sounds like they're going for a year-end release. Alright, page done. This page announces the release date for Zelda, Ocarina of Time on the N64, which is set for November 23rd in the US, and still to be announced for the UK, typical. It's from the E3 show floor, so they've had a play of a preview version. Hurrah. Apparently Miyamoto himself is keen to make sure it feels properly Zelda-ish, and they've brought back the spin attack, which is good to hear. They reckon there are over 100 scenes, including sneaking around a castle, and some dungeon bits. The screenshots show Link in various situations, like getting music lessons from some bloke, rescuing the Triforce from Alan Titchmarsh, cheeky, and maybe messing with time travel again. There's a little side note called Tim's E3 Notes, saying everyone was expecting a lot from this Zelda game, and it sounds like it hasn't disappointed. They mention the Z button targeting and the camera being good, and reckon it plays like a dream. November can't come soon enough, they are saying. Sounds promising, fingers crossed it lives up to the hype, eh? This page then kicks off with a look at Pocket Monsters Stadium for the N64. Seems like Nintendo are finally bringing it over here in August, after the Japanese lot have been enjoying it. They are banging on about whether we'll be able to use it with the 64GB pack, and if you need to have a monster-filled Game Boy Pocket Monsters cartridge just to play it, which sounds like a right faff if you ask me. Apparently from what they've seen, it's just your typical turn-based battling type thing. There are some screenshots showing Pikachu and some other critters slugging it out in an arena. One of the blurbs even says, politically incorrect shocker, which sounds a bit dramatic, doesn't it? Oh. Flicking over to the right side, there's an advert for some anime on video. First up is Dirty Pear Flash, episodes 1 and 2 on VHS or DVD, out now apparently. Then below that it's Neon Genesis Evangelion Genesis Chapter 0 verse 9, again on video, containing episodes 17 and 18, released on July 6th. EVA Rampage. It screams, sounds a bit over the top, but each to their own. You can get them from places like HMV and Virgin, and all the usual video shops. This page then features an article called Walk This. A bit cheeky that, eh? Seems Max Everingham is over in Japan and he's having a bit of a moan about how the locals walk. Apparently, they are not very good at it, and he's there to teach them a thing or two. There's a picture of a busy Tokyo station and a close-up of an N64 controller, with a caption about using the R button for a gentle stroll. Bit of a laugh there. Below that there's another article called Look Into My Eyes, which is about Miyamoto gazing into the future of games. He's been chatting with Famitsu Magazine and blokes like Yu Suzuki, you know, the Sega Rally and Virtual On Man, and Hironobu Sakaguchi from Final Fantasy. They're talking about how games might be bought via satellite in the future, which sounds a bit sci-fi to be honest, and that the games market is going international. Miyamoto thinks Japanese developers should recognize that there's a market for games outside of Japan, and he's asked if this means we might get Nintendo games quicker over here. Well, we can but hope, can't we? He seems to think games will evolve depending on what developers invent, and that Nintendo is planning a follow-up machine to the N64. Already? Blimey, they don't hang about, do they? This page then, let's have a look. Right at the top we've got this massive title. Way sounds a bit dramatic, doesn't it? It's about this new game idea, a walking simulator. Apparently you just wander around a virtual Shibuya in Tokyo, trying to avoid bumping into people. Sounds thrilling, doesn't it? Although, to be fair, anyone who's been to Oxford Street on a Saturday might think it's quite realistic. Then there's a bit about the Pocket Pikachu thing. Nintendo released it in Akihabara, after everyone else had already got it. Bit daft really, making a big deal out of releasing it late, but they did shift 400,000 in the first week, so who am I to judge? Underneath that we've got extremely adept dude. Seems to be someone wondering who the top scorer is on some game. Judging by the screenshot it looks like that half-pipe snowboarding game. They are questioning who these initials are at the top of the leaderboard. Bit of a mystery gamer there. Rude. Hongo-san is back again, remember him? He's talking about Zelda 64 and how massive the cartridge is. Apparently it's got these massive boss characters and sprawling maps. He reckons we'll understand it all better when it finally arrives in the autumn. Looking at the charts, GQ Power Pro Baseball 5 is number 1, which is always popular over there. Then Yoshi's Story, Bomberman Hero, FIFA, and for Mr. 64. Further down there's Diddy Kong Racing, Super Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, Gambare Goemon and Tamagotchi World making up the top 10. Pretty solid lineup. Why not? The gearing up bit is all about how hyped everyone is for Zelda 64. Even though it's been delayed until November. Apparently Japanese gamers are still really excited about it, even more than they should be. They're saying it's the biggest game around at the moment, even bigger than Metal Gear Solid and Virtua Fighter 3, which were massive at the time. They even mentioned this 64DD role-playing game that vanished, Earthbound 64 they called it here, plus F-Zero X, and of course Pokemon Gold and Silver on the horizon. They are really building up the excitement for the next few months of N64 releases. And lastly, there's a Learn Japanese bit giving you phrases like sumimasen for excuse me, handy if you ever get lost in virtual Shibuya. Or the real one for that matter. All in all, typical page from the magazine really. Bit of everything. Games, news, charts, and even a bit of language learning thrown in for good measure. This page features a jolly looking picture of Banjo and Kazooie. You know, the bear and bird combo from Rare. Seems to be an article called Special Investigation from N64 Magazine, issue 17 by the looks of it. They're having a bit of a laugh, saying their special investigations can take us all over the world, but this time, they just nipped down to Rare's headquarters in Warwickshire. So, it's likely a behind-the-scenes piece on Rare, probably focusing on Banjo-Kazooie, which was the big game everyone was waiting for back then. Rare were on top of their game on the N64, so anything about them was always worth a read. This page is all about Banjo-Kazooie. Blimey, remember all the buzz around this one? It's an exclusive investigation, according to the magazine. Bit dramatic, lads, but alright. So yeah, Banjo-Kazooie coming soon in early July for us in the UK. Apparently those lucky Yanks get it in June the 30th. Nintendo and Rare are behind it, obviously. Those guys were on fire back then, weren't they? The article is talking about going to Rare's place to see it, says it was almost as impressive as Zelda back at Space World. Bold claim, let's see if it lives up to that. Sounds like they were shown it in a secret room, proper cloak and dagger stuff. They're utterly amazed apparently. Easy lads, it's just a video game. Warren, yeah. Down at the bottom we've got the Rare Bear Essentials, introducing the main players. There's Banjo, the honey bear, apparently easygoing, and Kazooie, a red-crested breagle, a right gobby one by the sounds of it. Then there's Tooty, Banjo's sister, the one who gets nicked by Gruntilda the witch, that's the plot then, and Gruntilda herself, looking like your typical wicked witch, broomstick and all. So, you know, classic Rare platformer stuff. Looks like it could be a laugh. Fingers crossed it's as good as they're making out. This page is a look at Banjo-Kazooie, specifically Bubble Gloop Swamp. Right then, gloomy level apparently infested with piranha fish. Charming. They're saying you need to get turned into a crocodile by Mumbo to get through it without being nibbled to death. There's talk of golden jigsaw pieces, naturally, and some little hut that's been lovingly designed, whatever that means. There's a bit about a tip-top choir minigame, bash turtles on the head in the right order, and you get a jigsaw. Simple as that. Then they've got a top 20 essential Banjo-Kazooie facts bit of a random list really. Number 1 is Kazooie being in Banjo's backpack. Groundbreaking stuff. Number 2 is about Kazooie's wings and swimming, and number 3 is about Witchy World being massive compared to Diddy Kong Racing, which, yeah, it probably is. Finally, number 4 is on the golden jigsaw pieces, which are the main collectible, tenner level. Standard platforming fare really. Collectathons were all the rage back then. This page is all about Freezy Peak from Banjo-Kazooie, remember that one? After Diddy Kong Racing, Rare were obviously feeling quite confident with snowy landscapes, and they've gone all in on this level. It sounds like the reviewer is quite impressed with the sheer size of the Christmas tree in the middle of it all, and you can even climb inside it apparently, which is a bit different, isn't it? They're talking about progress being hampered by these annoying snowmen chucking snowballs at you, which sounds about right for a Rare game. They always like to give you a bit of a challenge, and apparently you need to bop them on their hats. Classic platformer stuff. Boring. Then there's a bit about the save system in Banjo-Kazooie, not your usual boring save slots. Instead, each save is represented by Banjo doing something different at home. One's asleep, one's cooking, and the last one is playing a Game Boy. That's a nice little touch from Rare. They always put those details in, don't they? It mentions the Snowboarders Lodge in 1080 degrees as another example of their attention to detail, which is fair enough. Those games were packed with secrets. There's also some tips dotted around the page. Apparently you need to collect musical notes in each level, 100 of them, to open doors in the Witch's Lair, which lets you get to even more levels. Jinjos are back as well, those colourful little fellas, and if you find all 5 in a level, you get a jigsaw piece. Kazooie can also use golden feathers to become invincible for a short time, which is handy for getting past tricky bits, and your energy bar is a honeycomb at the top of the screen. You can get extra bits of honeycomb to make it bigger too. Standard platforming fare of the time really, but Banjo-Kazooie always did it with a bit of flair, didn't it? This page is a bit of a special investigation into Gobi's Valley from Banjo-Kazooie. Remember Banjo-Kazooie? Cracking game back in the day, proper collectathon on the N64. It kicks off with the Fly-Null Curtain storyline, something about Gruntilda wanting to steal Tooty's. Looks bit daft really, but that was the charm of these games, wasn't it? Apparently she's built some sort of machine, a bit like that film, The Fly. If you lose a life you get a cutscene, possibly the best on the N64, showing Tooty getting stuck in this beauty-stealing contraption. Sounds a bit grim now, doesn't it? Then it goes into the Gobi's Valley level itself, describing it as deserts and pyramids, crammed with camels and pyramids, naturally. They talk about the draw distance, and how you can see things fade into the horizon, which was pretty impressive at the time, rather than things just popping into view. There are little captions under screenshots dotted about. One mentions precision flying through rings, another that it's the 5th Jinjo you find, and each world has a maze. Another screenshot is about the Sphinx, with some on-screen hints from Rare, saying their interpretation is very nice. They were always a bit cheeky, Rare. Then there's section 9 talking about pickups, like eggs for Kazooie to fire, missiles, basically red feathers for flying, extra lives, wading boots for dangerous water like in Bubble Gloop Swamp, and running shoes for extra speed. Oh, and Mumbo tokens. Loads of bits and bobs to collect, wasn't there? Peckact. Feckact. Number 10 is about Mumbo the Witch Doctor. He's got holiday homes in loads of the game's worlds, 9 in total apparently, and he turns Banjo and Kazooie into animals to fit the world they're in. Walrus in Freezy Peak, crocodile in Bubble Gloop Swamp, and a pumpkin in Mad Monster Mansion. They point out, even as animals, they're still Banjo and Kazooie with their shorts and backpacks. Clever idea at the time, made you use different abilities. Section 11 is about Bottles the Moles, your mate who teaches you moves. Apparently, he pops up all over the place, and even if you don't summon him right, Kazooie still gets on with him. Bottles apparently has a good heart, and always has something useful to say. A proper helpful mole, that Bottles. Finally, number 12 mentions jigsaw switches that appear in some levels. Activating them gets you a jigsaw piece, but they're often time limited, and you've got to get to the jigsaw piece before the timer runs out, shown in the corner of the screen. Added a bit of pressure to the collecting those switches? Cagged. So yeah, a good look at Gobi's Valley, and some of the gameplay bits and bobs in Banjo-Kazooie. Classic N64 platforming, really. This page from N64 Magazine takes a look at the Mad Monster Mansion level in Banjo-Kazooie. They reckon even though the graphics up to this point have been alright, this level is a real step up. Properly amazing, they say. It's a bit spooky, but still got loads of colour and action with those animated gravestones and see-through ghosts. They even mention Logo the toilet, saying you might need Mumbo's help to squeeze in there. Cheeky. There's a bit about collecting red feathers, and how the mansion looks all dark and ghostly outside. Then they're on about some piano puzzle where you copy the tune the ghostly hand plays. Yeah, remember that head scratcher? Down below it talks about this giant Ouija board thing, saying even if you're not a genius you can spell out the right message to get a jigsaw piece, just watch out for the ghost while you're doing it. Pezza. Then there's a section on witch switches, typical Rare human naming things, saying there's one in each level, and they unlock a jigsaw in Witch's Lair, and a cutscene shows you where to look. Handy that. Number 14 is about warp cauldrons dotted about Witch's Lair, color-coded so you can zoom around. Useful for getting about quickly apparently. Number 15 mentions Gruntilda, calling her a careless witch because she's dropped her spellbooks, and if you find 3 you get new magic powers. And lastly, number 16 is about Brentilda, Gruntilda's nicer sister, and apparently she's keen to see her evil sister get her comeuppance, and will help Banjo and Kazooie out wherever she can. Good on her. This page then, is all about Rusty Bucket Bay in Banjo-Kazooie, which they're saying might be a bit more grown-up for the N64, even with a cartoon bear and bird running about. They're properly impressed with this level, set in a dockyard with a massive steel ship. Apparently you get to explore all over the ship, even below decks and in the hold, and you'll be using cranes to grab those jigsaw pieces. They reckon it's stunning. Bit strong, in it. Then there's a bit about our uncle the Aspidistra, asking if anyone remembers that old BBC Two adventure game from the 80s. Seems like they're comparing Banjo-Kazooie's puzzles to that, saying you get these tile puzzles where you step on a square and it asks you a question about the game, bit like Jeopardy, but apparently a billion times better, according to them cheeky sods. There's a section on Crate Leap Forward, all about what you'll find in the cargo ship's hold, evil crates with eyes that want to crush you. Sounds like you'll be jumping on them and rolling about to get another jigsaw piece, naturally. Yeah. Looking at the little captions with the screenshots, they're pointing out how big the ship is, the lighting effects, and that you need to stop the underwater propellers to get a puzzle piece. And there are vents you can climb into, but apparently, one of them bites. Charming. Number 17 is banging on about the 3D camera in Banjo-Kazooie, saying it's brilliant, much better than Mario's semi-automatic one. You're supposed to adjust it yourself, and use the C buttons to move it about. Number 18 talks about Banjo getting honey from beehives when he's low on energy, but watch out for the bees guarding their stash. Risky business, that is. Number 19 is on PAL conversions of Rare games, saying they'll be up to scratch and the game speed will be the same as the American and Japanese versions. Apparently there will be a bit of a wait between the US and UK releases, which is a bit of a pain. Finally, number 20 is full of hype for Banjo-Kazooie, calling it the biggest and best game of the summer, a real Mario beater, and saying they're very, very excited about it. Bit much, but we were all looking forward to it, weren't we? The next page here is all about Click Clock Wood from Banjo-Kazooie. Looks like it's the final world in the game. They're saying it's a bit different, based around a massive tree with 4 seasons, each with its own look and objectives. Spring has rain and flowers, summer has wheat fields, autumn is all brown leaves, and winter is like Freezy Peak, all over again. Sounds pretty ambitious for one level, even back then. There's a section called Feed Me, talking about an eagle called Irie you find in spring. Apparently you have to collect caterpillars for it in summer and autumn to make it grow up. If you manage it, it flies off in winter, and gives you a reward. Standard banjo stuff, collectathons within collectathons, eh? Then there's a bit called Smack My Witch Up. Bit cheeky that about the final boss fight with Gruntilda. They're not giving much away, just saying it's after you climb into her lair, and there are fireballs and thunderbolts involved. Sounds like they're trying to build some hype without actually saying anything, typical magazine stuff. Warrer. Finally there's a how much longer section. They're saying the game was supposed to be out in June in America, and we'd get it a couple of weeks later. They were impressed when they saw it at Space World, and reckon the graphics are amazing for the N64. They're even hinting that it could be the first game to really challenge Super Mario 64. Big words, let's see if it lives up to them, eh? To be continued at the bottom, saying they'll be the first to complete it for review next month. Bold claim, lads. This page is a bit of a tease in it. Right then, special investigation it says at the top. Very dramatic. It's asking when is a sequel not a sequel. And N64 Magazine is having a look at what Rare's up to after they basically conquered the world with GoldenEye 007. Apparently they are investigating their follow-up, but James Bond is nowhere to be seen. There's a picture of some futuristic-looking building at night, all neon and sharp angles, and you can just make out the word PERFEC in big block letters. Yeah, we all knew what that meant back then, didn't we? Perfect Dark was the word on everyone's lips, the supposed spiritual successor to GoldenEye, but without old Bondy. Intriguing stuff back in issue 17. Good times. This page is all about Perfect Dark, which, back then, was the game everyone was gagging for after GoldenEye. It kicks off with a bit about how Rare, the developers, were keen to move away from Bond after GoldenEye became such a hit. Apparently, even the film people behind Tomorrow Never Dies, that's the Bond film mind you, went to Electronic Arts for the game, not Rare. Bit of a snub, eh? They reckon the game they saw of Tomorrow Never Dies was a bit underwhelming, even with a sniper mode. Sounds a bit dodgy. Hey, anyway, back to Perfect Dark. The article says it's running on the GoldenEye engine game, but with a new title. It's supposed to be bigger and better than GoldenEye, with sharper graphics and more gadgets. They even sent someone to Atlanta to see it at some big game show, E3 I think. Apparently, a few lucky punters got to see it behind closed doors and the graphics were top-notch on the Nintendo 64. It's pegged for release in 1999 in both the UK and the US, and it's a 14-player game. They've even slapped an exclusive sticker on it so you know it's a big deal in the mag. Looks like they are really pushing Perfect Dark as the next big thing, and to be fair, after GoldenEye we were all ready for another shooter from Rare, weren't we? This page is having a gander at Perfect Dark coming to the N64. It's an investigation feature, which sounds a bit serious for a computer game, doesn't it? So, WHO is Joanna Dark, codename Perfect Dark, and she's a secret agent working for the Carrington Institute. Bit James Bondish, but a girl this time, which was still a bit novel back then. They're wondering if she's British or American, and hoping she's a bit like Diana Rigg from the Avengers, which, yeah, that would be brilliant. What is her mission? And it sounds like a right old kerfuffle. Investigating Datadyne, a multi-billion-dollar corporation for major international naughtiness. Turns out in 2023, which was the future back then, she's sussing out they're mixed up with extraterrestrial life forms. So she's got to figure out which aliens are dodgy and save Earth. Sounds like your typical save the world malarkey, but with aliens, so that's a bit different. Where is where all this is going down? Northern California, Chicago, underground labs and seabed alien shipwrecks. A right mix of places in it. They're saying it's revealed so far, so probably even more exotic locales later on. They mention underwater levels, deep sea and marine. And one on an airfield, Air Force One, which sounds a bit exciting. Apparently they're working on loads of levels, 12, with 8 more to come. Christ, that's a lot of game. There are some screenshots, looking a bit blocky, but that's the N64 for you. One caption says Perfect Dark's health system is different from GoldenEye, you don't recover health during a level. Bit tougher then, sounds like. Another mentions a Blade Runner-esque pistol, on top of a Datadyne building, fancy that. And another talks about fancy lighting effects and refraction. Ooh, get you, showing off. They even point out you can use 2 guns at once, and you push a trolley with one hand whilst holding a gun in the other. multitasking skills for the win. All in all, looks like they are trying to build on GoldenEye, which everyone was raving about then. Aliens and secret agents. A decent mix. Could be a bit of alright. This Perfect Dark. This page is a bit of a sneak peek into Perfect Dark, isn't it? It's part of an N64 special investigation feature. Proper exciting stuff back then. They're asking, how, part 2, and when about this new game. Under how, it talks about the gadgets you'll be using: mines, a heat-sensitive machine gun, and an anti-gravity bike for transport. Sounds a bit James Bond, doesn't it? Very GoldenEye-esque. The notes section mentions the heat-seeking gun targets moving objects, which is a step up from just static targets. And the mines are more than just weapons, apparently, used to blast into areas. The anti-gravity bike sounds like the tanking GoldenEye but quieter. Apparently Joanna can push objects around, like a trolley with a Roswellish alien in it that needs rescuing. How, part 2, is about the game style and tech. First-person shooter, of course, like GoldenEye. Technically it's boasting real-time lighting, ray tracing, reflections, Dolby surround sound, and a better frame rate. The notes section says it's using the GoldenEye engine, which is obvious from the screenshots, but they say they haven't got around to making new animations yet. A bit cheeky that. But they reckon it's visually much better than GoldenEye, with textures, lighting, and a faster frame rate. They are really pushing the boat out, saying it's a technical masterstroke. A bit much maybe, but we were all easily impressed back then. When? Is the big question, isn't it? When it's finished, they say. Very helpful. They reckon GoldenEye took 3 years, but a lot of that was engine work. Banjo-Kazooie was 16 months, so they're hoping Perfect Dark will be quicker. They're estimating around 10 months from July 1998, so sometime next year maybe. We'll keep you up to date, they say. We'll see about that, won't we? There are a few screenshots dotted about. One shows a guard with his back to you begging to be taken out, apparently. Another shows Joanna on her hoverbike and asks about other vehicles. There's one highlighting the skylight and reflections, showing off the graphics engine. And another with an enemy, mentioning the animations are still from GoldenEye for now. Down the right, there's a bit called Tim's E3 notes. Seems like Tim was at E3. Lucky sod. He's saying Perfect Dark is gonna blow everything away. Very hyped up. Typical magazine stuff. He says the demo was running on a 3D FX card and looked really sharp and detailed, but still obviously based on GoldenEye. He says it nearly made him cry. Bit dramatic, Tim. Warringtail. And right at the bottom it says, to be continued. Warringtail will be prizing more Perfect Dark snippets from Rare next month. So more to come then. They know how to keep us hanging on. Classic N64 Magazine. This page from N64 Magazine, it's their E3 Feet 98 preview, and A to Z of what was on show. Seems like Tim the roving reporter has seen a fair few games, over 80 apparently, mostly playable too, which sounds promising. First up in the A section we've got All-Star Baseball 99. Acclaim are bringing this one, due late 98, sports type obviously. They reckon it's graphically amazing, high resolution and all that, smooth animation, full of character apparently. Bit of a backhanded compliment though, saying it's a shame it's based on baseball, which they call tedious American sports. Each to their own, I suppose. Then there's All-Star Tennis from Ubisoft, also due Q4 98, sport again. Apparently it's the N64's first tennis game, and it was playable on PC before, but they're saying it's a bit rough around the edges. Not exactly selling it, are they? No. Moving on to B, we've got Battle Tanks from 3DO. Due date is TBA, action type. They seem quite impressed with this one, surprisingly good they say. Apparently they saw a video show reel with tanks battling in realistic cities, fast action, smooth graphics, plenty happening on screen. Sounds alright, they're waiting to get a preview copy to see how it plays properly. Next is Buck Bumble from Argonaut and Ubisoft, due in September. Action game. See page 22 for details on Argonaut's new sting-em-up, it says, bit vague. Looks like a bee or something in the screenshot, buzzing around. Lastly in B there's Body Harvest from DMA, who later became Rockstar North, and Gremlin. Due summertime, action, RPG. They seem really hyped about this one, calling it DMA's multi-vehicular blasting adventure, and the most impressive game to look at E3. Big claim. Apparently it's absolutely huge, with over 100 types of transport, biplanes, American cars, artillery, the lot. Only 3 levels were on show, split into sections, but they're saying it's more than they could see in the limited time. Sounds ambitious, we'll have to see how that one turns out. This page is diving into the alphabet of upcoming N64 titles, And kicking us off is C for Castlevania. Konami's bringing it out in November, and it's down as an action/RPG. They reckon it looks promising, even if it's just video footage they've seen. Apparently Konami are taking it seriously as it's Castlevania in it, so they're expecting a top-notch game. They're planning a full playtest next month, so we'll see then. Next up is Caesar's Palace from Crave. Due out, well, TBA. It's a sports title, though sports might be stretching it a bit, it's more gambling really. The review does have a point. Who wants to play a slot machine simulator when you could be doing something a bit more exciting? Still, each to their own I suppose. Ray. Then we've got Cruisin' World from Midway, coming in October. Racing game, obviously. They're not exactly sold on this one, asking why anyone would want a sequel to the first one. Calling it crap. Bit harsh maybe, but the first one wasn't exactly Mario Kart, was it? Wario. Moving on to D-Gal, we've got Duck Dodgers in the Third and Half Dementia from Ocean. TBA again, platform game. Daffy Duck's in 3D, showing it off on video at shows. Sounds alright for the kids maybe? Next D is Disney Puzzler from Capcom. Also TBA, puzzle game. Capcom are keeping quiet about it, not even confirming the name, but they reckon it's a Tetris-type puzzler with Disney characters. They're wondering if Street Fighter fans will be happy. A bit of a reach that, eh? Then we have Charlie Blast's Challenge from Kemco, due late 98. Puzzle again. Described as a 3D puzzle version of Bomberman. Graphics are supposed to be good, and it's got 4-player mode. Could be a laugh with mates I guess. Racco. E brings us Earthbound/Mother 3 from Nintendo. TBA once again. RPG. Apparently appeared in some promo stuff in the US, which might mean it's actually coming to the N64. They're saying it's more likely now with the state of the 64DD add-on, whatever that is. Toot toot toot. Earthworm Jim 3D is next, from VIS/Interplay September release. Platformer. VIS's Twisted Platformer they're calling it, previewed on page 18. Righto. Extreme G2 is in E, as well, from Acclaim October, Racing. See page 17 for a full preview. Sounds like a futuristic racer thingy. Roarington. Lastly for this page, F is F-Zero X, another Nintendo game, due in the summer, Racing again. They reckon it's the fastest, smoothest racer around. Adrenaline packed. Sounds like they're quite keen on this one, saying the tracks are creative and it's difficult, good for time trials and 4-player. Don't miss this one, they're saying. And then there's F1 Grand Prix, World GP, from Paradigm/Video System, Summer Again Racing. Screenshots and info on page 17. Seems to be a lot of races coming out then. Whoa. Overall, a mixed bag really. Some interesting titles coming, some a bit dodgy. Typical N64 Mag preview stuff really. Hyping up some, being a bit cynical about others. Still, keeps us informed, doesn't it? This page of the magazine is having a look at some of the games they saw at E3. It's an A to Z guide, which is a bit of a trek to get through. First up is Fighting Force 64. Apparently it's just a straight port of the PlayStation game, something like Final Fight. The reviewer seems a bit underwhelmed. Wasn't really what they wanted from Core apparently. Aye. Then there's Gex. Enter the Gecko, from Crystal Dynamics. They reckon the controls are a bit too sensitive, which makes it awkward to play. If they can sort that out, it might be alright as a platformer. Moving on to H, we've got Harrier Strike Force, a flight sim. Looks pretty good visually apparently, but sounds like there's not much proper game there yet, no enemies or actual gameplay in place at this stage. Brats. Then there's Hybrid Heaven from Konami. Only seen it on video, but it looks nice. Konami are taking their time with it, which they reckon is a good sign for quality. Expect it early next year sometime. For I, there's Iggy's Wreckin' Balls. Acclaim are doing this one, due out in the summer. They say it's very odd and a bit frustrating from first impressions. Multiplayer could be interesting though, maybe for a laugh. E. Next is International Superstar Soccer 98, from Konami again. Apparently it's finished already, we'll just have to wait until the football season starts to buy it. Always a safe bet for a decent footy game. Then J brings us Jest, from Ocean. Linear 3D platformer, with some nice special effects. They mention the main character has a possibly annoying walk, which is a bit specific. Warrington. Jet Force Gemini is next, from Rare. Action platformer, and they tell you to see page 6 for more, so must be a bigger feature in the mag. Beware. Knife Edge is next, from Kemco. Helicopter shooting game set on Mars. Sounds a bit generic, they say the computer controls the flying whilst you do the shooting. Might be better with a light gun they reckon, which were all the rage then. L is for Legend of Zelda. Nintendo are doing this one, due out in November. Action RPG. And they just say stunning, and tell you to see page 26. That's the one everyone's waiting for, isn't it? Nintendo November. Lode Runner 64 is next from Big Bang. Action game, with 20 areas for each of the 5 worlds. Gold extraction is still the main thing. Looks alright in the screenshots. Wendell-Key. Finally for M we have Madden NFL 99 from EA. Sports game as usual. Apparently it was playable at the show, and working in high resolution. NFL licensed, and they say looks sublime. If you're into your American football, this will probably be the one to get. This page in N64 Magazine, blimey, takes me back. Right then, it's an A to Z of E3 rundown, so looks like we are getting a sneak peek at what's coming to the N64. Starting off we have Mike Piazza's Strike Zone, baseball game, American One Guess, due out in the summer. Officially licensed, they say, probably means it's trying to be realistic, which can be a bit dull sometimes, can't it? Then there's Milo's Astro Lanes, space bowling. Sounds a bit daft, but could be a laugh. Scurves and zigzags in the lanes, that's certainly different, they say. Next up, Mortal Kombat 4. Now that's more like it. They are saying it's the first proper update since the SNES and Mega Drive days. Switching to 3D, eh? Not always a good thing, but they reckon it's still violent. Buckets and buckets of blood. Good stuff. Looks like Sonya's still lobbing projectiles, and Liu Kang is getting spiked. Ouch. Moving on, we've got NFL Blitz and NFL QB Club 99, both American football games. Blitz is arcade style, full 3D engine. QB Club is an update, hopefully sprucing up the celebrations, they say. Not really my cup of tea, but someone must like 'em. NHL Breakaway 99, more ice hockey, playable but no shots yet. Sounds like they're still working on it then. Then there is NASCAR 99. EA are doing that, due TBA. Racing game, obviously. N64 version of famed PlayStation game. Right, bit cheeky to point that out, isn't it? Screenshots look alright, I suppose. Could be brilliant if they get it right. We'll see. EAA. Mission Impossible is next. Ocean are doing that, due in September. Action game, beta version present and playable. They say see issue 15 for a proper look. EAA MLB. Featuring Ken Griffey Jr. Another baseball game from Nintendo, due out now. Photorealistic baseball game. Blah blah blah, we've heard it all before. NBA. Jam 99. Acclaim again, late 98. Basketball. 2-on-2, that's the classic Jam formula, isn't it? Total Team Management. Lame. Finally, Perfect Dark. Nintendo again, due 1999. Action. See page 40, right now. Intriguing. Very lovely Joanna Dark firing a very powerful machine gun. Right then. Sounds a bit James Bond-esque. They are impressed with the detail and lighting on the levels. Looks moody in the screenshots. Could be a bit good, this one. Gee, and that's your lot for this page. A mixed bag as usual. Some sports games, some beat-em-ups, racing, and a bit of action. Perfect Dark sounds like the one to watch though, eh? This page from N64 Magazine, right, it's got the usual E3 preview stuff. We're looking at games starting with Q, R and S do. Looks like they're trying to make the deathmatch as good as GoldenEye, which is a tall order, isn't it? Apparently crouch isn't working properly in this version, typical, but hey, plenty of enemies and gore, so that's something. Menjik. Then there's Quest 64, RPG from Konami, due out in the summer. Sounds like it's pretty but still a bit rough around the edges. They say it's lush as ever, whatever that means for a game. Rev Limit is kicking about. Racing game, apparently not very good. Moving swiftly on. E. Rogue Squadron. Now that sounds more interesting. LucasArts doing an X-Wing game. Surprise hit of the show apparently. Shadows of the Empire. Flying bits, eh? Sounds promising for Star Wars fans. And out before Christmas, so that's good timing. Rush 2. Extreme Racing. More racing, this time with Vegas and Alcatraz tracks. Lighter handling they reckon, but the music is awful. Hard to get excited about another racer when we've got Mario Kart and Diddy Kong Racing already, isn't it? 2. Shadowgate 64. Trials of the Four Towers. Blimey Shadowgate, that old NES game? RPG due out, TBA. Looks okay. Hardly a ringing endorsement. Silicon Valley, now this is a bit different. Action game, from Take-Two, October release. Sounds a bit odd, camera system a bit erratic, needs more work. Could be interesting, or a bit of a mess. Farrington Valley. Snowboard Kids 2. They're just presenting it as a title, great news apparently. Not much info there then. Farrington Valley. South Park game. Acclaim. Late 98. Action. Comedy shooter. Custard pies instead of guns. Comedy shoot 'em up then? Yeppa. Right then. Right then. Super Mario RPG 2. Nintendo. 1999. RPG. Fleeting glimpse of turn-based battles. Intriguing, they say. Well, Mario RPG was alright on the SNES, so maybe this will be good. Rayman 2 is going 3D. Tonic Trouble influence apparently. PC version first. N64 version coming. Almost indistinguishable. Sounds like they are trying to recapture the 2D platformer feel in 3D. We'll see about that. Revolt. Radio-controlled racing game. Levels in museums, toy shops, that sort of thing. Detail on the cars is good, physics excellent. Mazda kart rather than Top Gear Rally. Not sure what to make of that. Scars. Racing with wheeled tanks. Wipeoutish, fast and smooth. Weapons not working yet, but missiles and bombs coming. Nice prospect. Could be a laugh. And finally, Superman. Titus. TBA. Action. Disappointing. Horrific misting, lack of animation. 4-player mode not great. But then, they haven't finished it yet. Doesn't sound too promising for the Man of Steel, does it? Lack of animation. So, yeah, typical E3 preview stuff. Some interesting bits, some not so much. Rogue Squadron, and maybe Super Mario RPG 2 looking like the ones to watch. The rest. We'll see. This page is having a look at what games were on show back at E3 in '98 for the N64. First up is Survivor Day 1. Sounds a bit like they're trying to cash in on the Tomb Raider craze, but with dinosaurs and a biblical storyline. Bit bonkers really, and they reckon it needs a bit more work yet. Top Gear Overdrive seems to be shaping up nicely though. They're saying the graphics are crisp, and it's a proper step up from the original, which is good news for racing fans. V-Rally, that's looking decent too, even if they only had one track playable at the show, but the handling and graphics sound like they're spot on. Then there's Turok 2, and blimey they are proper keen on this one, just saying, lovely, you don't get much clearer than that, do you? Virtual Chess 64 is being touted, Konami's involved now, and it's got 3D chess pieces, which is probably exciting for chess enthusiasts maybe. Wile Country Club. True Golf Classics, that's the golf game from the SNES days making its way to the N64. Hawaiian setting sounds alright if you're into a round of virtual golf. Now then, 12 Tales. Conquer 64, this one's interesting. Rare are doing a squirrel game, and naturally, it looks the dog's bollocks. Apparently it's got a Banjo-Kazooie kind of feel, but with a squirrel that's got a bit of a creepy smile, and they're saying it should be out in November. Well, Rare should know their own release dates, shouldn't they? WCW/NWO Revenge. The wrestling sequel, they didn't see it at the show, but there'll be more on it next month. Wipeout 64 is also sounding good. Apparently Psygnosis have pulled their finger out, and it's looking promising. Tasmanian Express is another platformer, looking nice on video at least. Tonic Trouble looks alright visually, but they reckon the controls are a bit of a mess. Camera issues again, typical. Twisted Edge Extreme, snowboarding game, lush graphics, might be one to keep an eye on. WWF Warzone, more wrestling, page 24 for that action. And lastly, VR Pool, wasn't even on show. Screenshots are just okay, it's pool, in it. Overall, seems like the usual mix of promise, and maybe a few duds coming our way on the N64. The next page of the N64 Magazine, issue 17 it is, and it's the arena section. Looks like they've reviewed and rated some games. Right at the top, big letters for GT64, saying it's trying to be the next big racer after Multi-Racing Championship and Top Gear. Asking if it's any good. There are some screenshots, looks like your typical racing game of the time, polygon graphics and all that. Then below that, Buster Move 2, or Puzzle Bobble as we might know it, coming to the N64. Says it's a surprise debut on the console, bubble bursting fun starting here. There's a screenshot of that too, colourful bubbles as you'd expect. On the right side, there's an N64 Arena Guide to Scoring. Explains how they rate games. Apparently, N64 carts are pricey, so they play the games properly before giving out top marks. They've got a Star Game medal for 85% and above, saying only the truly worth buying games get that. Then 84% to 70% is still jolly good fun and worth considering. 69% to 50% is where they hate giving marks, games that are perfectly playable but not special. 49% to 20% is for lazily programmed games, and then 19% to 0% is the disaster zone, where they tell you the whole truth. Bit dramatic, aren't they? Seems like they take their reviews seriously, trying to guide us on what's worth our hard-earned cash. This page of N64 Magazine takes us to the import arena, showing off games that were making their way over from America and Japan back in '98. We've got titles like Dual Heroes, promising to be better in English but not by much. Cheeky! Then there's Aero Gauge and it says, you saw the ad, you knew it would happen. Which sounds like one of those games that was hyped up, perhaps a bit too much. Bomberman Hero is there too, called a much improved N64 return for Hudson, suggesting maybe the previous Hudson N64 efforts weren't all that. NBA Courtside, Nintendo's basketball blinder bounces into the USA, sounds like a confident arrival on the scene. And finally, Power Pro Baseball 5, described as a baseball RPG. It could only happen in Japan, which is probably right, those Japanese and their quirky games. Below that, there's a section titled How It Works, explaining their review categories. They've got visuals, sounds, mastery, lifespan, and verdict. Fair enough categories, standard stuff for a game review really. They ask questions like, are the visuals GOBS macking? And are the tunes any good? Pretty basic, but gets the point across. The Norse cookeries. Then we've got Team 64, their panel of experts. Each of them has a little picture and a quote, and they've all picked a game of the month. James Ashton is drinking tea, says he needs 2 cups to smile in the morning, and his game of the month is Banjo-Kazooie, can't argue with that. Rare at their best. Will Overton is all Feng Shui plants, and his pick is Bomberman Hero. Paul Jarrell with his plant is on Aero Gouge. Andrea Ball, with a bag of sweets, chose Buster Move 2. Jez Bickham looks a bit intense, and went with Fighter's Destiny. Tim Weaver is linked to GT64, and Martin Kitts, with his coffee jug, is all about NBA Courtside. Lastly, James Price, with his adapter, picks Dual Heroes. So a mixed bag of games getting the thumbs up from the team, and a little glimpse into what these N64 experts were like. All in all, a decent snapshot of the import scene, and how they approached reviews back then. This page then, it's all about GT64, Ocean's new racing game for the N64. They're making a big deal about it being the next big racing thing for the console, rolling into town and all that. It's supposed to be a bit like Gran Turismo, but maybe not quite as serious. They're saying it's a semi-sequel to Multi-Racing Championship, which was alright back in the day. Looking at the screenshots, it's got a bit of an arcade racer feel to it, maybe like GTI Club, which is mentioned in the text, or even Top Gear Rally and Sega Rally. They reckon it's not quite up to the PlayStation's best racing games though, and that's probably fair enough considering the N64 is supposed to be half as powerful. One of the speech bubbles even jokes about rear-ending an opponent being a bad way to take a corner, classic N64 era humour. They mention it's out now, priced at £55, which is a fair whack, and needs a controller pack and rumble pack naturally, to get the full experience. Overall it sounds like they're a bit unsure if it will actually be that amazing, but they're willing to give it a go, and see if it lives up to the hype. This page is all about keeping track, literally, in GT64. Right then, 6 tracks apparently, but it's really 3, each with a long and short version, a bit of a cheat if you ask me. So, we've got the European GP first. Apparently, the cobblestones are slippy as anything, making cornering a pain. They reckon it's a mixed bag with villages, open fields, tunnels, and stadiums, bit of everything thrown in. Sounds a bit chaotic really. They moan about T-junctions and dead ends, which isn't ideal when you're trying to race, is it? Apparently the warning arrows for corners are a bit late sometimes, classic. Good times for the short course are around 1 minute 15 seconds and a bit. And for the long one, about 1 minute 40. Noted. Next up is Japan GP, Tokyo, described as particularly ugly looking, charming. Lots of 90-degree corners, so good for handbrake turns apparently. Short and long routes again, narrow roads, lots of turns. They say the short course is harder than the long one, which is a bit odd. Good times for the short and long courses are 1 minute 17 and 1 minute 42 respectively, both and a bit. Right you are, warranty gang. Finally, there's the American GP. They're saying if you're disappointed by this one, tough. Beachfronts and stadiums, sounds a bit Daytona USA-ish, which isn't a bad thing I suppose. Roads are wide, corners aren't too difficult, you don't even need to brake, apparently. Bit tame then. They mention a discrepancy in times. Their best for the short route was 1 minute 22 and a bit, while the long route was 1 minute 27. They reckon that proves the long route might be longer, but it's certainly not harder. Deep, EEE. So there you have it, GT64 tracks, European, Japanese and American. Short routes and long routes. Lap times and a bit of opinion from the mag. Noted. This page is having a look at GT64. Mechanical monster they've called it. Sounds a bit dramatic, doesn't it? They reckon it's built on solid foundations but lacks a bit of pizzazz. Right, so cars first. Apparently it's got official licenses, so you get all the proper motors like Nissan 300ZX, Toyota Supra, Lamborghinis and Porsches. They're banging on about this Avex dome car. Must be one of those fancy Japanese ones. Says it handles nicely, drifting and handbraking, but a bit sluggish to get going, which is a pain. Then there's Garage. It's like having a bit of Phil Mitchell in your game, they say, letting you tweak the car settings. You can mess about with suspension, tires, spoilers and gears. Apparently softer tires make a difference. And gear ratios, obviously. Spoilers are just for show really, aren't they? Take Off is about getting a good start. You've got to rev the engine between 5000 and 6000 revs before the lights go green to get a turbo start. Sounds a bit fiddly. Warrant. 2-player is about playing with your mates, obviously. Apparently it's alright in 2-player, same speed for both of you, which is fair enough. Lastly, cameras. GT64's the first N64 racer with a rear-view mirror thing, which is a bit of alright. They reckon if you want to make the game feel faster, go for the front view. And apparently, don't be surprised if skyscrapers pop up out of nowhere. It's all part of the charm of GT64. They say turning on the handicapping will guarantee a close race too. So yeah, GT64. Sounds like it's got some bits going for it, but maybe not setting the world alight. Probably worth a rent from Blockbuster on a Friday night. The next page in N64 Magazine features a review of GT64, which they've given a 67% score. It sounds like they are a bit disappointed with it after the hype. The reviewer starts by talking about how great the handling was in Multi-Racing Championship on the N64, really nippy and precise, and how they thought a sequel would keep that handling and just fix the visuals and track variety. But apparently, Genki, the developers, have gone and changed the handling in GT64, and not for the better it seems. They've also made the visuals worse somehow, even though they've supposedly upped the track count to 12, though the reviewer reckons it's really only 6, perhaps doubled up with mirrored versions. They mention pop-up is still an issue, and now you get skyscrapers suddenly appearing, which sounds a bit rubbish. There's some screenshots of the game, showing the cars racing, one with a bit of a side skid, and another in a tunnel. They point out in picture captions that the car bonnets don't get damaged, and someone called Tim is doing a skid for the camera. Very exciting. They've got little boxes down the sides summarizing different aspects like visuals, saying the locations are more diverse than multi-racing, but otherwise it's just pretty average. Sounds. Apparently the engine noise sounds like bees attacking, which is certainly a unique description. Mastery. They reckon the handling is perfect and exciting while it lasts, but visually it's pig ugly. Ouch. Lifespan, they say it's addictive, but needed more tracks and surprises. In the verdict, they say GT64 is well enough to cope with its visual problems, but you need to ramp up the difficulty straight away. They conclude that it could and should have been so much better. So not exactly a glowing review then, is it? Sounds like maybe I'll stick with Top Gear Rally for my N64 racing fix if this is anything to go by. This page then is all about Bust-A-Move 2, or Puzzle Bobble 2 as some of us might still call it. There's a how-to guide at the top, breaking down the simple concept of matching colored bubbles, aiming with your launcher, and trying not to let the bubbles reach the bottom, the dreaded deadline. It mentions arcade and 2-player modes, and arcade mode is described as following Bob, this little chap, trundling around an island playing Bust-A-Move against different people. Sounds a bit daft, but that was the style back then, wasn't it? Bumbly. Then there's a review of the game itself. They say it's sprung out of the blue, this Arcade 2 edition, calling it one of Taito's finest moments and a great puzzle game. Bit strong maybe, but it was definitely addictive, wasn't it? They mention it being on the PlayStation and compare this N64 version. They reckon the colors are a bit washed out and the sound isn't amazing, maybe sampled with a woolly sock, which is a bit harsh but typical of the time. They mention screen borders, top and bottom, and say it might have taken Probe, the developers, minutes to sort it all out. Sarcastic, obviously. They admit despite all this, it's still fun and addictive, joking about losing hours to it and ending up playing until 8 in the morning on a Wednesday. Yeah, I can relate to that. Those puzzle games could really suck you in. They finish by saying it can take over your life and hoover up your spare time like a giant Dyson. A bit over the top, but they get the point across. It's a proper time sink if you're not careful. This page then is having a look at Bust-A-Move 2 on the N64, or Puzzle Bobble as we knew it back in the day in the arcades. Colourful bubbles and all that. They reckon if you've not played it before you might be surprised how addictive it is, and they're not wrong. Simple idea matching 3 bubbles, but it gets properly frantic later on. They're talking about different puzzle modes, like Man of Letters where you clear lettered zones, and in the middle of a chain reaction which sounds like the normal game, and Special Bubble 64 feet, with unique bubble types like star bubbles and metal bubbles. Sounds a bit more involved than just the standard bubble popping. Walk. Then they've got little boxes rating the game on different things. Visuals gets a 3, saying they're functional but nothing special for the N64. Sounds also gets a 3, called woeful, but they admit it's not the point really. Mastery gets a 5, saying it's masterful, even pocket calculator level simple. Lifespan gets an 8, saying it's hard as nails in puzzle and arcade mode. Which is probably right, those later levels could get a bit tough. Verdict overall is a solid 80%, saying don't be put off by the looks, it's one of the best puzzle games and the finest on the N64. Bit strong maybe, but it was decent enough for a puzzle game, wasn't it? Good time killer if you were bored. This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at Dual Heroes. It's talking about how in robot mode the game plays itself, kind of a training mode they reckon, and shows you the moves on screen. They've got some screenshots of a fight between Hawina, who they call Cutie Chaser, and another character. Looks like they are teaching Robohana how to play, showing off some moves like Fubuki and Lethal Change. There's a bit where they managed a 10-hit combo, apparently pretty lucky, and another where Hana pastes Guy all over the ring. The review itself is a bit lukewarm to be honest. They mention Hudson Soft, who were knocking about on the SNES and PC back in the day. Seems like Dual Heroes got a pretty poor score in Japan, something like 28%. And the reviewer over there wasn't impressed, hoping it wouldn't come out over here. But it did, in PAL format with an English translation. They're saying it uses a standard 3-button setup, but the D-pad is useless, everything is analog control. Apparently running around your opponent is the first thing you'll try, and you'll think it's alright at first, but then you realize the AI is a bit rubbish, doesn't even see you half the time. They reckon Hudson are pushing it as a 3D beat MUP, but it's just a bit more comfortable than some. Sounds like they're not exactly blown away by it, but you know, it's another beat 'em up for the N64. This page of N64 Magazine, back in '98, is having a look at Dual Heroes. Remember that one? It was a Hudson game, out now apparently, and they're asking 55 quid for it. Seems a bit steep for what you got, looking back. The reviewer seems a bit lukewarm on it all, to be honest. They say if you squint and pretend it's a 2D fighter, it's alright. Competently programmed, they reckon. There's talk of decent throws and special moves, and the animation being outstanding, bit of an overstatement there, mate. They mention you can walk behind your opponent by pressing Xi, mind-blowing stuff at the time, sarcasm intended, and that the CPU is a bit daft, falling off edges and walking into walls. They say the arena walls can be electrified, which sounds a bit cheap and nasty. Apparently if you fall off, the CPU will often jump off with you for a honorable draw rather than actually winning. How very sporting of them. There's a bit about a virtual reality mode, which they seem to think is a bit of a novelty. You can create virtual fighters based on your own style, which they say is a cheap way of winning. You can even battle these virtual versions against your mates. Sounds like a bit of a gimmick really, like some sort of digital Pocket Monsters stadium. Warring. They've got these little boxes rating the game too. Visuals get 4 out of 5. Saying it's well animated, garishly coloured with ginormous borders. Sounds about right. Sounds get a 3. Inappropriate tinkly tunes, not many FX. Mastery also gets a 3. Brilliant virtual player option, ruined by terrible AI. Harsh but fair. Lifespan is a 5, saying the VR mode will keep you going. Dunno about that. Ruku. The verdict is a 50% score. Better than we thought it would be, but it's only really worth renting for a couple of nights. Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. Probably best off saving your 55 quid for something else. Plenty of better games out around that time if you ask me. This page in N64 Magazine. Yeah, I remember this issue. It's a review of Aerogauge. Blimey, what a stinker, eh? They gave it 10% and they're not wrong. Thankfully, it doesn't get much worse than this. That pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? Boy. Looking at the screenshots, it's all a bit of a visual mess, isn't it? They're even joking about how bad the water effects are, and the dodgy track appearing out of thin air. Welcome to Popsville Population Aerogauge. Quite witty actually. They're ripping into the sounds too, saying the mute button on your telly was designed for this game. Ouch. And Mastery asks if ASC2, the publishers, have ever actually seen an N64. Bit harsh, but probably fair enough from what I remember. Lifespan? Try again? Oh, Aerogauge, you are a wag. Right then. Spend £50 on this, and there will be tears. Sounds about right for the price of games back then. And the regret you'd feel after buying this? The reviewer, Martin Kitts, really lays into it. He mentions Wipeout 64, Extreme G, and F-Zero X as games it's trying to compete with, and failing miserably. He talks about it being like a ropey 32-bit game, and how it's basically an epilepsy simulator with foul graphics, cheating computer opponents, tedious races, and badly designed tracks. He's not holding back, is he? Aero Gauge is truly a game beyond redemption. Strong words, mate. Strong words, pony. Yeah, Aero Gauge. One to avoid, even back then when we were desperate for anything new on the N64. Glad I never wasted my pocket money on that one. This page in N64 Magazine, issue 17, takes a look at Bomberman Hero in their Import Arena section. Right at the top it says, Bomberman's a hero, but think Cooperman rather than Superman, which is a bit of a lukewarm intro, isn't it? They previewed this game back in issue 14 apparently. They're letting us know that the games in this section are Japanese or American imports, so not officially out in the UK yet, but they'll review them properly when they eventually make it over here. There's a little info box about Bomberman Hero. It's for the N64 naturally, 64 megabytes, cartridge based, and uses the controller and rumble packs. It was about 6,900 yen, or roughly 35 quid back then. Crikey, games were pricey. Looking at the screenshots, it's certainly Bomberman in 3D. One shot shows Bomberman in a kind of purple level, with a big exploding sphere. Another one is in a more brown, rocky area, with a black Bomberman character mentioned in the text, saying he crosses up from time to time but doesn't do much. And there's another one with explosions, and what they call dangerous stuff, in the depths. The reviewer is talking about Bomberman 64, saying it was a bit dire, and you might have thought Hudson would either give up on 3D Bomberman, or really rethink it. They reckon Hudson went for the latter with Hero. They are suggesting maybe it was a bit rushed out after Bomberman 64. They say it's more like a 2D platformer in 3D, a kind of muddled mix and not quite what they wanted for the N64. They do admit it's intermittently fun and more lively than its predecessor, but still not the perfect Bomberman game they were hoping for. Sounds like a bit of a mixed bag then. Not terrible but not amazing either. This page is about Bomberman Hero for the N64. It's in a section called Traveler's Tales. Looks like they've got a few different level types on show. There's one underwater, which they say is alright, but things slow down a bit for no real reason. Apparently Hudson, the developers, changed the bomb controls so B button is out, and the right shoulder button is in. Clever idea apparently. Then there's a bit where you're on these rotating propeller things, which sounds a bit dodgy with things suddenly popping out from nowhere and more slowdown. They mention collecting diamonds to go faster, a bit like Mario Kart coins they reckon, and you can do a spin attack with the B button to get rid of enemies, and you have to jump between snowy paths without falling down gaps. Sounds a bit precarious, to be honest. Then there's another section where they moan about the screen being too small for the number of enemies, and you're falling off cliffs a lot, which they describe as a canyon abyss, very dramatic. Finally, they're on about a level with a rabbit from the SNES Bomberman games. Apparently you can only jump in this bit, no bombs, just jumping on platforms, and they don't sound too impressed with the level design, calling it tedious and jerky for Bomberman's N64 debut. Oh dear. It's all about laying bombs usually, but not in Hero apparently, or at least not in all the levels. They've got some other bits at the top of the page, one with giant flowers spitting poison, must be all that compost, eh? And another bit with a mirrored room where you'll get done if you're rubbish. Charming. This page then, it's all about the boss encounters in Bomberman Hero, bless him. They've split the game into 5 planets, each with a few levels and then a boss at the end, you know the drill. First up is this weird clown, sounds about right for Bomberman. Apparently he's got lasers and spins around. The trick is to watch out for when he changes direction. Keeps you on your toes, I suppose. Then there's the lava spider, popping out of lava and firing lasers, and doodlebugs, which sounds charming. The reviewer is already moaning about the camera in this one. Imagine that, camera issues in a 3D game on the N64. Never. They say it makes it tricky to avoid the lasers while running around. Sounds like fun. Camry. Next we've got the giant eagle, and apparently everyone at the N64 office was scratching their heads wondering what to do with him. Turns out you gotta drop bombs on his head, who'd have thought. They mention using fans to go upwards but say you can just go upwards anyway, helpful tip that. Then it's the whip woman, a rabbit thing with a whip, in World 4. She's on a platform and the lava spider apparently pops up again to join in. Bit of a double whammy boss fight there. Lastly there's the brick sphinx, a stone lion chap who's apparently the only boss that's actually difficult. You've gotta bomb his blue diamond forehead, then his tail, then his forehead again, all while he's firing missiles. Sounds a bit involved for a Bomberman boss if you ask me. Oh, and there's the blue foe who shows up a few times. They reckon he's an evil Bomberman type, throwing all sorts of bombs and using PlayStation button symbols on the floor. Bit cheeky that. Down at the bottom they're having a bit of a natter about the camera angles, saying it's all a bit different from the older Bomberman games, trying to be 3D and all that. They say it's sometimes a pain to control the camera, and you have to hold buttons to change the view. Sounds like a faff. They reckon the levels are more bite-sized than before, and there's no multiplayer mode, which is a bit of a shocker for a Bomberman game, isn't it? They're saying Hudson have gone for a single-player adventure this time, maybe trying to be a bit more serious or something. Still, it's Bomberman, so it'll probably be daft fun anyway. This page from N64 Magazine, back in '98, is having a look at Bomberman Hero. It's titled, Firestarter, Floodstarter. Bit dramatic in it. They're saying bombs are aplenty, as you'd expect from Bomberman, but they're not just for blowing people up this time. There's a bunch of little sections about different bomb types and bits in the game. Firebombs are standard stuff apparently, but visually pleasing with a circular flame, a change from the old 16-bit explosions. Then there's salt bombs, which are a bit odd, used to fill places with salt and seem to hurt enemies, requiring a couple of hits on those slug things. Ice bombs are good for freezing enemies into ice cubes, which you can then jump on, but they melt quick. Remotes are detonatable bombs for placing wherever and setting off when you want, handy for avoiding explosions. They're showing screenshots of the game too. One shows some spikes, typical platforming stuff. Another with crumbling platforms, again old hat really. There's Bomberman underwater or paddling, bit of a change of pace. Moving platforms you have to bomb to get rid of turrets, sounds like a bit of a faff. And ball-tossing snowmen, and some spider thing with one eye, bit random. The reviewer, Tim Weaver, is saying it's like Bomberman 64, but maybe not as good, calling it Mario without his tache. They reckon it's a shame there's no proper multiplayer, just the single-player game, which is niggly and frustrating in places, but still enjoyable. They're saying the arenas in Bomberman 64 were better. Apparently this version is more diverse, with flying, diving, snowboarding, jet skiing, and even a green rabbit-thing. Sounds a bit all over the place. The camera is marked down as surprisingly given the constraints, alright, not exactly raving about it. In a section called Accessibility, they say it's easy if you speak English. Visuals are just tidy, nothing special, but Bomberman 64 looked better. Sounds are described as Japanese keyboard tinkering, which is a bit vague. Mastery is about pop up and slow down, with a flawed 2-desk engine, and some nice levels but mind. Lifespan is just average single player, no multiplayer, middle of the road stuff. The verdict is an improvement, but not enough of an improvement, and a genuine disappointment. They give it 66% and say tut tut. Not exactly a glowing review then, is it? Still, Bomberman, eh? Fond memories, even if this one sounds a bit naff. This page covers Kobe Bryant's NBA courtside for the N64, under the Import Arena banner. It seems like the magazine thinks Nintendo is onto a winner with this one, with the headline proclaiming, Nintendo scores from downtown. They reckon the graphics are pretty sharp, almost like a PlayStation game but with better detail, and the animations are supposed to be top-notch. Apparently the players move realistically and the camera work is decent enough, and they mention it has some clever AI for defense. There's a bit about creating your own players, and you can even build teams of giants, or include legends like Larry Bird and Magic Johnson if you fancy it. Bit of a laugh that. They do have a little moan though, saying the slam dunks aren't that exciting and that scoring can be a bit dull for folks used to the constant action on TV. It also says it's already out in the US, but we'll have to wait until June over here, and it'll set you back about 45 quid. Oh, and there's a funny little bit complaining about the commentator being biased towards the home team. Yeah, that sounds about right for these games. This page in the mag is having a look at NBA courtside on the N64. Remember that one? They're making a fuss over Kobe Bryant, calling him the new big thing in basketball, and hinting he's in the game. Apparently the controls are dead simple, A and B buttons do the basics, and the C buttons are for a bit of flash. They reckon the graphics are decent, and the sound is alright, both getting an 8 out of 10, and that you feel in control of the game, another 8 there. They even gave lifespan an 8, so plenty to keep you going apparently. Presentation-wise they weren't blown away, but overall, they're saying it's a proper good basketball game. Sneaker squeaking king is what they called it, slapping a 90% score on it. There are a few screenshots dotted around. You can spot Dennis Rodman in one with his crazy hair, and Kobe Bryant doing his thing. They even go as far as saying it's the second best sports game on the N64, after ISS 64, which is high praise indeed. Back then ISS was pretty amazing, so courtside must have been alright then. This page is about Power Pro Baseball 5 for the N64, seems like a review. Right then, baseball on the N64, who'd have thought it? Apparently this is the 5th in the series, and they reviewed the prequel, Power Pro Baseball 4, way back in issue 3, showing their dedication to the sport, or maybe just imports. Denter. The review is broken down into sections: accessible C, visuals, sounds, mastery, lifespan and verdict. For accessibility they're saying it's out now in Japan and unlikely in the UK, typical import situation back then, Konami being Konami. The management section is baffling, and the RPG mode is confusing but fun, begging for an English translation as usual. Visuals are praised as the cutest sprites on the N64, which is a fair enough compliment for the chunky graphics of the time. Sounds are good too, with music, commentary and stadium noise sounds like they got that bit right. Mastery gets a 3 out of 5. They reckon apart from the sounds you could think it was a SNES game. Bit harsh maybe. Lifespan is only good if you've got a like-minded friend, probably meaning it's good for multiplayer then. Warrington there. The verdict at the end is 78%, knocking off 10% if you don't like Japanese weirdness or baseball, which is a fair cop. The reviewer seems to think it's a decent game, mentions hitting home runs off dodgy opponents, and playing against humans is more of a match. They also mention the graphics being sprite-based like Tokyo South Park, which is a bit of a weird comparison. There's something about a mad scientist and exploding heads which sounds properly bonkers. Typical Japanese game then. All in all, sounds like a solid import if you were into your baseball and didn't mind a bit of oddness. Martin Kitts wrote the review apparently. This page then, it's a how-to for escaping Forsaken on the N64 in the hard way. Bit dramatic, isn't it? Seems like they're still banging on about Forsaken after reviewing it last issue. Gave it 87% mind you, so they must have been impressed, or maybe just filling pages. Daniel Glenfield's the writer, and he's telling us to get our trigger finger ready and prepare to do battle. Right then. But so, it kicks off with the usual guff about how amazing Forsaken is, and that, everyone's playing it. Then it gets into the general tips, which are pretty standard stuff really. Don't just rush in with guns blazing basically, and manage your shields. Fair enough. Then there are more specific tips. Don't panic! Yeah, cheers for that mate, really helpful advice when you're being shot at. It's about keeping cool when you're swarmed by enemies. Momentum is another tip. Apparently it can help or hinder you, and you should use short taps to control your craft. Sneaky tactics they call it. Finally, narrow gaps. Apparently the gaps are a bit small for your pine cycle things, so slow down and use vertical strafing to get through safely. Don't want to scratch the paintwork, eh? Pafawa. There's a screenshot as well, looks like some in-game action, pew-pew laser beams and all that. Yeah, Forsaken, it was alright, wasn't it? Pretty fast and flashy for the time. All those spinning levels and whatnot. Not sure it needed a how-to-escape guide though. Bit of a try-hard title for a tips page, even back then. This page in N64 Magazine, right? It's all about getting better at Forsaken, specifically how to move and be a bit of a sneaky git really. Its headline's strafing, going over the basics like side strafe, which is just moving sideways to dodge bullets. Nothing too complicated, but essential in any shooter. In it, then it mentions circle strafing, comparing it to Doom, which everyone was doing back then. Vertical strafing is a bit more Forsaken specific, going up and down holes, which is handy when you've got robots coming at you. Diagonal strafing? They say you'll hardly ever use it, so probably not worth bothering with too much. And apparently even strafing in water is a thing. It's slower, obviously. They also mention listening out for enemies, eyes and ears, which is common sense really. Then there's a section called Cowardly Tactics, which is a bit cheeky. They're basically saying, it might not be honorable, but these sneaky tricks work. Sneaky tactic is about hiding from turrets, because apparently, they are a bit thick if you are out of sight. Ear to the ground is about listening for enemies behind doors. Hello/goodbye is about opening doors a bit then backing off to let enemies come to you, easy pickings. Follow me to your doom, fool, is about leading enemies into a corner and blasting them. Classic. And finally, cover. Using rocks and pillars, which again is just standard shooter stuff, especially important as health in Forsaken is apparently a bit thin on the ground. It's all pretty basic tips really, but back then you lapped this stuff up to get any edge in these games. Forsaken was a bit of a looker at the time with its 360-degree movement, but blimey, it could get a bit frantic, so any advantage was welcome. This page then is all about other tips, looks like handy hints for getting through games, mainly focused on Forsaken it seems. Right at the top it says proceed slowly, which is fair enough. Back then you couldn't just run and gun everything like in GoldenEye. Well, you could try, but you'd probably end up in a right mess. They're saying take your time, be sneaky, which is probably good advice for most games really. Then there's think in 3D, telling you to look for secret passages high and low. Yeah, games were getting a bit cleverer with level design then, weren't they? Not just flat corridors anymore. Power pod. For Forsaken it says grab that power pod at the start to power up your phaser. Sounds essential really, makes fighting those robots easier. Weapons is next, just a general point about making every shot count in Forsaken. Ammo was always a bit tight in those games, wasn't it? Talking about specific weapons now, MFRL. Apparently it's rockets, and it does good damage, so aim properly. Fair enough. Beam gun overheats quickly they say, so tap the fire button, don't just hold it down. Good to know. Probably saved a few folks some grief that would have. Incoming phaser fire. Can't avoid it, so charge towards it firing everything you've got, mugs and your main weapon. Bit aggressive, but sometimes that's what you had to do. Eyes open reminds you to look out for secret doors and panels blending in. Yeah, those sneaky secrets, always good for extra bits and bobs. Nitro section, only needed it once they reckon, in a radiation room for a crystal. Speed boost to get in and out quickly, sounds like a sticky situation. Trojax, charge it up to release a blue ring of power, massive damage. Always good to have a weapon like that when things get hairy. Power up section now, starting with scatter missiles. They're saying these are great for multiplayer, making opponents lose weapons and causing damage. Mines, defensive in tunnels or offensively luring enemies into them. Classic mine tactics really. Long shots, fire ahead if you think droids are about, explosion if they are. Bit of a risky strategy but could work. Key items, picking them up brings in enemies. Always a bit of a trap, wasn't it? And then there's scatter missile. Again, must be re-emphasizing they mess with enemy shields and weapon energy. Aiming, shots hit below the crosshairs. Bit odd that, but good to know if you were struggling to hit anything. Lastly, shield/weapon energy capsules. Don't pick them up if you're nearly full already, save them for later. Sensible advice, waste not want not, eh? The page is dotted with screenshots from Forsaken, showing the in-game action and weapon pickups. Looks like a decent guide page for the game, back in the day when you actually needed these tips printed in magazines, not just look them up online, eh? Simpler times maybe, but we got through it. This page then is a how-to guide for Forsaken. Looks like they're trying to help folks escape the game the hard way, according to the title. Cheeky, it's got sections covering different aspects of the game. First up, switches/timers, basically saying you can shoot switches from afar, saves you getting in a scrap with the robots. Good tip that, lazy gamers like me appreciate that. Warrington Dorcas. Next, bosses. Apparently you can't kill them, just grab a beacon and leg it. Fight the smaller guys until the timer runs out. Sounds like a right pain, but fair enough. Infinite lives, now this is talking. They've found a cheat. Go to a level, grab an extra life, restart the mission, rinse and repeat. Do it 10 times and boom, infinite lives. Sneaky. We loved a good cheat back then. Save after every level. Common sense really, but they're saying save your game after a few levels, or even every level if you're struggling. Then if you mess up on a nasty level, you can go back and try again. Sensible advice. Warranty. Timers. Hitting them spawns enemies, deal with them before hitting the timer again to clear your path. Another handy tip. Nuke droid section, looks like you've got to protect this little droid in a level. Clear the enemies out first to make it easier, and stay close to blast any robots that come for it. Sounds like a escort mission, always a bit stressful those. Protecting lives, if you're about to lose a life to a boss, pause and restart the mission. Basically, a quick way to avoid losing a life. A bit cheap, but we've all done it. Safety complex for the Power Dome mission. You could apparently shoot the target without messing with the switches. Find the side with the red orb, shoot through the gap and job's a good 'un. Handy shortcut that. Finally, how to access the harder levels. There are 3 paths, easy, medium and hard. Or as they joke, hard, harder and insane. To get on the hard path you need to finish level 1 nuke in under 1 minute 40. Medium path is between 1:41 and 2:30, and easy path is over 2:31. They also mention you can skip a chunk of the hard path by playing the medium path and then leaping onto the hard path at the end of a level, which takes you to the last level quicker. Clever stuff, Warrington. So overall, a decent page of tips for Forsaken, some handy hints in there, and a bit of cheat advice too. Just the sort of thing you wanted back in the day when you were stuck on a level and needed a bit of help without phoning a premium rate number. This page is all about the nasties you'll be facing in some shooter on the N64. They're calling them MDF minions, which sounds a bit generic, doesn't it? It's a rundown of enemy types and how to deal with them. A bit of a how to survive guide. First up are the tanks. Big blue things apparently, trundling about on set paths firing slow energy bolts. Easy enough to avoid by strafing. And apparently low on armor, so anyone who can shoot straight will sort them out, though they can be a bit more tricky in groups. Then there's the MFRL tanks. These are a different kettle of fish, heavily armored and firing fast rockets. They move on a set route and open fire if you just go near their exhaust fumes, which sounds a bit daft, but alright. Cover isn't much use, so you're told to get out in the open, use your primary weapon and strafe diagonally while listening for rockets. Apparently when they get to the end of their route they get confused, and that's your chance to open fire. Sounds a bit convoluted, but there you go. Next are gun turrets, firing fast plasma bolts. You can beat them by shooting from a distance while strafing. Classic really, but they are small, so harder to hit the further away you are. Mounted phasers are strategically placed to guard power-ups, firing damaging phaser blasts too fast to dodge. Apparently, if you can get above them you can take them out, or just rush them and blast them quick as you can. Twin-shot attack ships are big and slow, but they take a few hits and fire plasma bolts with gaps in between, so vertical strafing is needed. They are slow to rotate so you can get lots of hits in. Kidik. Then we move on to the aircraft. Monoshot attack ships are more deadly than the bigger ones, more mobile and sneak up behind you, firing plasma bolts. You're told to circle strafe them so they can't lock onto you. Pina, MDF light attack ships, small grey menaces, can make life difficult with concentrated energy blasts. Best way is to stay back and strafe while returning fire. They tend to roam in packs and sneak attack you from the rear. Lovely. Scoutcraft, on their own they're simple to take down, a couple of shots from a level 2 pulsar does the trick, but in groups they are more deadly, and can sap your energy. Strafe to move back a bit and give yourself a fighting chance. Birdwing, Falcon class, fast and deadly, firing high-speed energy bolts. Apparently, you rarely find them alone, and they can lead each other away from the pack, making them easier to pick off. If a whole pack chases you, then you need to reverse back through the level firing rapidly. Sounds like a bit of a handful. Mobile phasercraft, similar to the mounted ones but mobile obviously. You need to take them out quickly to avoid heavy damage, and they are hard to lure away from other enemies. If you come across them in a group of MDF army types, tough luck. Dace Mayware, finally, Gravguncraft, always found with other enemies. Their job is to hold you while everyone else takes pot shots. Take them out first before engaging anyone else, using your secondary weapon to soften them up. Sounds like cannon fodder then. So there you go, that's your guide to surviving the MDF's best. Hopefully, that'll see you through, sounds like you'll need it. This page, let's have a butcher's at this then, is a how-to guide for dealing with Babalaz, who I'm guessing is the big bad guy at the end of Forsaken. Right, Forsaken on the N64, that was a pretty decent shooter back in '98, wasn't it? Proper fast-paced and all that. This article reckons it's the penultimate level, and you've got to take down Manmech, Maldroid, Dreadnought and Ramoan, all these chaps. They say it's not as hard as it looks, but we'll see about that. Or easy. First up is Manmech. You get attacked straight away apparently. The tip is to grab the orbital pulsar, then deal with the initial enemies and move into the main chamber. There's some tanks and mounted phasers to sort out. Then you get to blasting Manmech when he stops moving using everything you've got, and apparently you can push him into the wall to finish him off. Sounds a bit cheesy, doesn't it? Thay. Next is Maldroid. Start by turning around and grabbing a power pod, then using the small rock for cover against gun turrets. You have to navigate some lower and higher pathways, deal with more mounted phasers, and tanks. There's a golden power-up hidden away, and the trick to beating Maldroid is circle strafing to dodge missiles. Classic stuff really. Das. Then there's Dreadnought. Apparently the small passages have power-ups, and you want the power pod in the main chamber. Take out the gun turrets first, strafing as you go, and then once they're gone, Dreadnought comes at you. You need to hit him hard before chasing him around this circular track. Don't worry about the tanks, they say, they're just cannon fodder. Keep left, use the transpulse, and when he goes into the next chamber, there's a switch to squash him. Very satisfying they reckon, I'll be the judge of that. Lastly, Ramoan. No messing about with mini-missiles they say, go straight into battle. This is where the tip for the last boss comes in handy. Collect all the power-ups, then go back to the beam-in point, whatever that is. Wait for Ramoan to land on a rock, and then launch everything at him. When missiles are coming, shoot the base of the structure Ramoan's on. Apparently a missile will explode harmlessly, allowing you to reposition. Keep doing this until he's low on energy, and moves to the acid room. Give chase, grab some weapons, and then in the acid room, fire a few shots, lower your craft, get close to the structure, locate the switches, and flip them until Ramoan falls into the acid. Job done. MDF threat sorted. Warrington male voice. Challenging enough for you? They're asking if you've finished Forsaken yet. Well, have you? They reckon beating 1 minute 38 seconds for the first level is good. Blimey, sounds a bit tight, doesn't it? Good luck with that then, eh? This page is a competition from N64 Magazine, asking if you can tell your Elvises from your Priscillas, or a Hershey bar from a Cracker Jack. It's all about testing your knowledge of Americana to win some awesome stuff. To get in on the action, you needed to send in some Americana. They've got a bit of a list of things that spring to mind when they say American cowboys, hamburgers, hippies, rappers, drive-thrus and drive-bys, massive car engines, serial killers, confessional telly, UFO abductees, Super Bowl Sunday, gangsters, lawyers, the Fifth Amendment, people of all shapes and sizes married together, Las Vegas, Twinkies, the NRA, the FBI, Roseanne, bubblegum, roadhouses, Hollywood, and all that jazz. It's quite the eclectic mix, isn't it? The prize for the most imaginative piece of Americana was a proper bundle, an N64 console with 3 games of your choice. Or if you already had a console, they'd give you 6 games instead. They were also clearing out their cupboards of N64 bits and bobs for runners-up, so some lucky sods would get some extra goodies. Can't say fairer than that, really. There's a picture of the N64 console itself, along with the grey and blue controllers, and a game box for Bust-A-Move 2 Arcade Edition, which was a decent enough puzzler back in the day, if a little bit of a SNES port. It all feels very E3 time, given they mention it's their E3 issue, and wanting to get in the spirit of the event. Looking back, it was a good time for the N64, just before things got really interesting with the later game releases. The next page is a competition page from N64 Magazine. Seems like they're giving away an N64 console, and a choice of either 3 or 6 games. It's themed around California dreaming for some reason, with little quotes from the magazine team about America. James reckons the USA will win the World Cup by 2010, bless him. Bit optimistic there, mate. There's Paul, who's gone all dreamy about cheerleaders and, no doubt, singer, very 90s. Andrea's going on about lardy buttocks, which is a bit much. Will thinks American adverts are great if they deliver grit, whatever that means. And Tim's doing a bad American accent, seems like they're having a laugh anyway. Visually, there are game box shots for Mario Kart 64, Blast Corps, Pilot Wing 64, and Super Mario 64. Solid lineup of N64, launch era titles there. Can't go wrong with any of those. Mario Kart 64 was still the king of kart races back then. Blast Corps was a bit different. Quirky destruction game from Rare. Pilot Wings was a nice relaxing flying sim. And Super Mario 64, well, that was just revolutionary, wasn't it? Changed everything. Down at the bottom there are the competition details. You had to send in American things to the magazine address on Monmouth Street in Bath. And there were the usual rules. Closing date was August 1st. Employees can't enter. You needed to include stamps and packaging if you wanted your entry back. And apparently the editor was in a mood, and Elvis had left the building. Standard magazine competition stuff, really. This page then is from N64 Magazine, and it's an article about how to get good at WCW versus NWO on the N64. It's got a massive picture of Hulk Hogan, looking like he's about to sell you insurance, you know the one. All orange fake tan and bandana. The article starts by saying, despite a fairly lukewarm review in the mag before they gave it 70%, it still sold loads and got into the UK top 10 charts, so they figured they'd give a guide to it. Standard really, you know how these mags were, gotta cover the big games, even if they weren't amazing. Get ready to rumble, it says at the end, in a very enthusiastic way, slightly over the top if you ask me, for a game that only got a 70%. This page is all about getting better at WCW vs NWO World Tour on the N64. It's a bit of a guide to some of the tricks you can use in the game. They're calling them general tips, and it's things like how to break free from a pin or submission, which is basically just waggling the analog stick about like mad. Sounds about right for that era of games. Oh, there's a section on dragging your opponent away from the ropes so they can't do a rope break, which is fair enough, stops them cheating out of your hard work. Then it mentions getting in an extra hit with a leg drop before you go for a submission, which, yeah, every little helps in these games. And then there's the bit about weapons. They're acting all surprised you can use weapons in a wrestling game. Cheeky, but it explains how to get chairs, tables, bats and stuff from outside the ring, by walking towards the rail and fiddling with the D-pad and the C buttons. Apparently once you've got a weapon, it doesn't really matter which one it is, bat, chair, table, it's all the same, just tap B for a quick whack, or hold it for a slower, harder one. They even say the ref doesn't care about illegal weapons, which, again, sounds about right for wrestling games, doesn't it? A bit of harmless violence never hurt anyone. In a video game, of course. The next page here is all about wrestling on the N64, specifically WCW vs NWO. World Tour it looks like, yeah, good times. It's a guide on how to play the tag team and battle royal modes, and it reckons tag matches were the most fun to watch back in the day on Saturday morning telly. Right, so it's giving tips on tagging, saying always tag your partner if you're getting a pasting. Makes sense, like a lifeline apparently. Oh, there's a bit about, you're looking at me, which is about winding up the wrestler waiting outside the ring, and another section on pinning your opponent, and how their teammate will try to break it up. Then Battle Royal mode is mentioned, saying the easiest way to win is to stay outside the ring and let everyone else batter each other. Cheeky, but effective I suppose. Yay. Human involvement is about multiplayer, saying that's the key to N64's success, and mentions double teaming and supercharged taunt. Double teaming is just mashing the A buttons apparently to do some impressive moves, and supercharged taunt is about getting the crowd going to boost your spirit level and get an advantage. There's a bit called additional talking about waiting for your opponent to get near the ropes and then tripping him up. Or even better, pulling him outside and giving him a beating with a baseball bat. Bit brutal, but alright then. And lastly, an unsporting way to play, which is about wandering over to the other side of the ring and pulling the other team's wrestler down to stop them tagging in. A bit sneaky that, but they say it makes it easier to win, so each to their own. It's all about getting one over on your mates really, isn't it? Typical N64 fun. This page is all about getting better at WCW vs NWO World Tour on the N64, a wrestling game that was pretty popular back in '98. It's got a bunch of tips laid out with screenshots, like how to do a ducking move to avoid getting smacked when you're getting up, and rolling to confuse your opponent, theatrical tumble they call it, bit dramatic. Then there's no escape, which is about trapping someone against the ropes, bit of a cheap tactic really, but they're telling you to batter them then chuck them out of the ring. Block and avoid is your basic defense advice, saying blocking and ducking are your mates in this game. Moving on, corner post tells you how to mess about on the turnbuckle instead of just jumping off straight away. Grappling is about winning those button mashing struggles, saying whoever stabs the A button first wins. Helpful if a bit obvious. Float like a butterfly is just telling you to run away if you're getting a pasting, makes sense. Lying in wait is a sneaky one. Hop outside the ring, grab a weapon, and wait for your opponent to jump over the ropes, then wallop them. Chucking out time is about getting someone near the ropes and doing a big throw out of the ring for major damage. And lastly, attack quickly is about following up your power moves before your opponent gets back up. Common sense really. They've even stuck in a little box saying you only get 20 seconds outside the ring, so no hanging about. Good solid tips if you were struggling with it at the time, probably still work now if you dust off the old N64. This page is all about wrestling moves in WCW vs NWO World Tour on the N64. Classic stuff back then. It's showing you the basics like striking, which is just hammering the button for a quick flurry of kicks and punches, just button mashing really, but effective. Apparently holding the B button gets you a more powerful strike, or using the D-pad as well. Running strikes are mentioned as well. A quick tap for a knockdown, easy to counter though they say. Then there's grappling, which is where the fancier moves come in. You grab your opponent, and then it seems you can do all sorts by using A or B buttons, or with the D-pad for different moves, especially from behind. They even mention super grapples if you hold the A button. More powerful but leaves you open, so you've got to time it right. Probably best when they're worn out a bit. They've got some screenshots dotted around, bit blurry as you'd expect from the N64, showing guys in the ring doing their thing. And the captions are a bit of a laugh, little jokes, like a Ric Flair one, and another about dropping an earring in the ring, proper banter for the time. Good memories, eh? WCW vs NWO. It was pretty decent for its day, wasn't it? This page is all about WCW vs NWO World Tour on the N64, proper wrestling game back in the day. It's giving you some tips for when you've got your opponent down, like after you've floored them. Options are things like hold, strike, drag, and pick up. Then it talks about counterattack, which they say is a bit unreliable, but you can try and turn the tables during grapples or blocks if you're lucky. There's a section on count-out wins, classic cheesy tactic, just throw them out and taunt them. Or you can use can't stop running to bash them into the barrier outside. Submission hold and kiss my boot are both count-out related tricks too, bit of a theme going on here. So yeah, that's your N64 wrestling masterclass right there. Simple times. This page from the mag, right, it's all about wrestling on the N64, proper lad stuff back in the day. It's teaching you how to get the most out of your grapples in WCW vs NWO World Tour. Remember that one? Blocky graphics, but we loved it. Fagra. So it starts off talking about spirit, which is like your wrestler's mental state apparently, not just brute force. Green is normal, and you want to get it up to special for the good stuff. Apparently battering your opponent raises spirit, or you can be a bit of a cheeky git and taunt them. Taunting leaves you open though, bit risky. Then there's the special moves. Once your spirit meter is maxed out, these are your proper character specific moves. Super grapple, front or behind, sounds a bit vague, doesn't it? And you can spam these specials until the meter goes back to normal. Cheeky. Submission holds are in there too. Obvious really. They say if your opponent's spirit is low, they're more likely to give up. Good to know, but we all just wanted to smash each other, didn't we? Awkward. And then it's on to finishing moves, or finishing techniques as they call them, because they're not exactly finishes, are they? More like big moves to humiliate your mate before you go for the pin. They list a few. Spinal smash, which is a corner job, bit of a dropkick. Then there's freight train collision, get them on the ropes, bounce them off, and then bam, button bash in the middle of the ring. Triple T, or twin turnbuckle terror, sounds a bit daft, climbing up two corner posts to jump on them. And finally cross smash, another ropes job, but you bounce off the other set of ropes this time. Timing is key apparently. There's a bit about a secret taunt in additional, calling it offensive, made by the developers for a laugh. Sounds like you need 2 controllers for a multiplayer tag match and player 1 taunts player 2 using the up button and top C together. Lads being lads I suppose. Today. Lastly, they're asking if there are any others. Reckon there are loads more finishing moves to discover. They want you to send them in with instructions. Classic mag stuff, getting the readers involved. Good times. The next page shows some tips for WCW vs. NWO World Tour on the N64, remember that one? They're calling them secret characters, which is a bit of a laugh because everyone knew about these back then. To get Diamond Dallas Page you just had to finish the WCW League, pretty easy peasy. Randy Savage was the same deal but in the NWO League, ooh yeah, dig it. Glacier was in the IU final, and then there's these two, Joe Bruiser and Widow, they're unlocked after beating all 4 leagues and then doing the marathon mode, bit of a grind for those two. And finally Wrath, you get in by smashing through the DOA Federation. It's all about league modes and getting to the final matches. Then there's a bit about extras in the game. Apparently, if you use the analog stick on the character select screen, you can zoom in and have a good old nosy at the wrestlers, see them in all their pixelated glory. Broken arm mode sounds nasty. If you've got realism turned on, use an arm breaker move loads of times, and you'll see your opponent walking around clutching their arm. Blood mode, well they had to have blood, didn't they? It's wrestling. Turn realism on, and after a good hit, especially with a weapon outside the ring, you'll get some claret. And lastly, spinning monkey, something to do with turnbuckles and spinning around. Never really bothered with that myself. Oh, and there's a bit about T3 Magazine, the mag for blokes who love gadgets, it says, remember that? This issue is all about Japan apparently, calling it big in Japan. Something about Japanese tech, bullet trains and arcades. They've got features on Sharp TVs, World Cup tellies, and Alpine car navigation, fancy stuff back then. They're even doing a trial offer, 3 issues for £4.50 if you're interested. Offer ends July 31st, 1998. Bit of nostalgia there, eh? This page, it's from N64 Magazine, must be around 98. Going by that massive World Cup 98 plastered all over it. Seems to be giving us the lowdown on how to actually win the World Cup in the game, you know, on the N64. Martin Kitts has written it, and he's going on about the excitement around the real World Cup back then. Bit dramatic, isn't it? Most intensive TV watching experience, calm down mate. He's even harking back to when England were last any good in the World Cup, whenever that was. Stuart Pearce and Chris Waddle getting a mention. Proper old school names. Apparently they gave the game a review in the last mag, so issue 16 if you're digging out your back issues. And the picture? Standard footy game fare. Bloke kicking a ball. Yeah, just a typical hype piece trying to get us all excited about pixels kicking a virtual ball around. This page from the N64 Magazine is all about getting the most out of World Cup 98 on the Nintendo 64. Right away they're on about the controls being a bit laggy, which was a common moan with these footy games back then, wasn't it? They reckon you should whack the game speed up to faster to help, and turn off fatigue, which is probably a shout if you just want a proper arcade blast without your players knackering themselves out after 5 minutes. There's a bit of a joke in there about putting a sock in Moten. Classic footy commentary humour, you know the sort. Then it moves on to what they call total quality management fancy. Basically it's team tactics. Formations are first up, they say it's personal preference, but reckon a diamond midfield is the way to go for lots of passing options. Then they talk about IGM, in-game management, letting you switch formations mid-match, which is handy for when things go pear-shaped. Marking is automatic apparently, which was pretty standard for the time to be fair. And lastly, they mention customizing your squad, having a rummage through the reserves to find hidden gems like they mention Les Ferdinand and Duncan Ferguson, even some Scottish bloke Duncan Ferguson. They also bizarrely mention someone called Glenda, and cutting off your nose to spite your face. Bit random, not sure what that's about. Probably some in-joke in the office. So yeah, a few tips to get you started with World Cup 98, nothing too groundbreaking, but helpful enough if you were just picking it up back then. This page from N64 Magazine, right, it's giving you the lowdown on how to get good at World Cup 98. It's all about giving it 110%, see? Bit dramatic, but that's mags for you back then. Whoa, bruh. So, first up, it's passing. They're saying World Cup 98 is all about the passing, especially compared to ISS 64, remember that one? Apparently you can ping it about all over the shop. The tip is to do long diagonal passes to get your wingers in, and just tap the button for a normal pass. Simple enough, really. Whoa. Then we've got dribbling. If you want to be flash, dribbling is your way to score apparently. They mention a skill mode using the Z or R buttons for some fancy footwork, calling it Pella-style trickery, and specifically the Rocastle 360 degrees. Bit cheeky naming it after Tim Rocastle, showing their age a bit there, eh? Buzu. Next is tackling. Apparently, the players automatically try to win the ball back, so just getting in front of someone is often enough. But if you're feeling a bit nasty, you can go for a slide tackle, the cynical foul as they put it. Just don't do it too much or you'll get carded and banned. Fair enough. Shooting is number 4. You can aim left and right with the stick, and how long you hold the button down decides the height. The trick for scoring is to line yourself up from midfield, or get it out wide and then cut inside for a diagonal shot to the far post, especially if the goalie is coming out. For free kicks, they reckon using Zion R to curl it into the top corner is the way to go. Nice one. And penalties, they say the computer cheats, but you can try to outsmart it by walking to the side and just standing there. Apparently the ball might just hit you. Classic N64 keeper AI, eh? Lastly, set pieces. Free kicks, corners, penalties, all good chances to score. They say pick your best player for free kicks and penalties, someone with a strong shot. And for corners, you want a decent midfielder to put it in the right area. Makes sense, really. Lekker. Overall, it's a basic guide to World Cup 98, nothing too groundbreaking, but probably helpful if you were just starting out on the N64 back in the day. Good times. This page then is all about getting one over on World Cup 98 for the N64. Right at the top it says by any means necessary, which pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? They reckon sometimes you just have to cheat in footy games, especially at the international level. Borrington. The first tip, do the Klinsmann, is a classic bit of gamesmanship. Basically, if you're going in for a tackle and think you might mess it up, just go down like you've been shot. Hold Z, press top C, and try to aim your dive just in front of where you were going to be tackled, to hopefully con the ref into giving you a free kick. Cheeky, but hey, if it works. Hen, shoo. Next up is play to the gallery. They're saying there's nothing wrong with enjoying your goal celebrations, just like real footballers do. So milk it for all it's worth, enjoy those replays, get different camera angles. Why not? You've just scored, haven't you? The last bit is properly naughty switch controllers. If you're getting hammered by the computer, they suggest pausing the game, going into the options, and swapping your controller over to the other team. Then you can just score a load of own goals for them to even things up. They admit it's a bit of a cheat, and it definitely wouldn't work against your mates unless they were a bit daft. But against the computer, who's gonna know? Only your conscience, apparently. And then there's a bit called predictions. They've got their own predictions for how World Cup 98 will go in the game. They reckon there won't be many surprises until Austria somehow beats Brazil 32, and France makes it to the final, only to lose to England thanks to a last-minute goal by Sol Campbell. Sounds about right, doesn't it? Famous last words, eh? They think it's plausible anyway, and tell you to remember you read it there first. Loads of screenshots dotted around of the game in action with players like Shearer, Sheringham, Batty, Seaman getting a mention in the game too. Good times. This page then, from an old N64 mag, dives into the dark and gothic world of Quake. Remember that one? Properly intense for its time on the N64, wasn't it? This is a how-to guide to sniffing out every last secret in level 13, Termination Central. Apparently there are a fair few hidden bits to find, 5 in total. They reckon level 13 is a good one for secrets, corridors and all that. The guide walks you through each one, starting with a shadow hiding a secret door, then pressing buttons to get quad damage. There's even some slime jumping involved to grab some rockets, and a bit of green slime swimming to get to a teleporter. Of course there's more quad damage to be had on a lift, just watch you don't get squished. And finally, boxes to climb to get a health bonus. So, there you go, all the secrets in Quake level 13 laid bare. Bet that was helpful for some players back in the day. This page here is all about finding those pesky secret areas in Quake 64, remember that? Level 14, Vaults of Zin, apparently has 3 secrets to sniff out. The guide talks you through jumping across lava for a rocket launcher in Secret Area 1, which sounds like classic Quake platforming. Secret Area 2 involves dropping onto a box in lava to find a ring of shadows, handy for sneaky players. And Secret Area 3 is about pressing Q buttons, Q to open doors, Q to teleport. Sounds like they were really pushing the Q button on this level. Apparently if you do all that you get to the top of the level, guarded by zombies and a shambler. Charming. Then it moves on to level 15, Tomb of Terror, with a mere 2 secret areas. This level is described as small but tough, crammed with ogres and death knights. Nice. Secret Area 1 involves more Q button action, climbing steps, shooting walls, all for a red armor bonus. Secret Area 2 is simply going back up some steps and turning right for some health. Thrilling stuff, eh? Looks like they are really scraping the barrel for Secret Area content here, but back then, finding anything you weren't supposed to was proper exciting, wasn't it? This page from N64 Magazine, issue 17, takes us through the how-to section, proper guide to getting the most out of your games. Looks like we're digging into secret areas, something we all loved back in the day, didn't we? First game up is Quake 2, level 16, sounds a bit edgy, Satan's Dark Delight. They reckon there are 4 secret areas in this level, blimey. For the first one, you're told to take out the ogres after crossing some bridge, press the Q symbol on the wall, and then turn around and shoot a yellow light. Sounds like a right faff, to be honest. Then Secret Area 2 involves riding a moving platform until you see a blood-stained room with an ogre. Shoot a button above a ledge, and apparently, a wall opens up to reveal a horde of power-ups. Always handy, especially in Quake 2, Ammo City. Secret Area 3, you're meant to shoot strips on a wall in Secret Area 2 itself. Bit convoluted, innit? And finally, Secret Area 4, you have to go through a bloody room, take a lift up, shoot a colored light on the ceiling for another pentagram because you'll need it, and then jump into a hole in lava to get to level 18. Sounds a bit much even for Quake 2. After that we move on to Turok 2, level 17, Chambers of Torment, nice and cheery title again. Only 2 secret areas in this one, thank goodness. Secret Area 1, you grab the silver key, look up at the ceiling, shoot the Q button and get yourself some yellow armor and a quad damage icon. Right on, who doesn't love a bit of quad damage? Secret Area 2, go through the silver door, head left to find ogres lurking in the rafters. Shoot a Q button at the top of an elevator to allow access to the ogre area. Don't waste nails on switches though, just use the single shotgun. Advice there from the magazine. Secret areas, eh? Used to spend ages trying to find these things, didn't we? Good times, good times. This page here is all about uncovering secrets in Quake on the N64. It seems to be a guide to finding hidden areas in levels 18 and 19, the Haunted Halls, and the Tower of Despair. Level 18 is described as a bit of a maze but straightforward enough, and they're showing us how to grab 4 secret areas within it. The first one involves shooting a grate at a T-junction for quad damage, classic Quake power-up that is. Then there's another, involving a small lift and dropping down a hole, and another, with a ceiling switch above a vor. Those teleporting beasties were always a pain. The last one in level 18 involves a risky jump for a pentagram of protection over lava. Sounds like the kind of daft thing we'd all try back in the day. Level 19, Tower of Despair, is apparently trickier, and again they're highlighting 4 secret areas. First, shooting a blue window and pressing a dagger button to get a shotgun. Then, shooting a wall at the end of a corridor for some illusionary armor. Spooky indeed, or maybe just a bit of smoke and mirrors. The third secret is after dealing with a shambler in a pool, and involves beams and ramps guarded by ogres to find a health bonus, typical Quake level design really. The final secret area in level 19 is a bit more involved, going back to beams, shooting a red window, taking a lift, and dropping down for another secret area. They're really making you work for these secrets, aren't they? It mentions precision jumping on tiny beams. Bet a few of us fell into the lava on that one back in '98. Good times, frustrating times, all part of the fun with Quake on the N64. This page is a right blast from the past, isn't it? It's a how-to page from what looks like N64 Magazine issue 17, showing us the ropes for a couple of games, Turok 2 and Shadow Man. 1998, simpler times, eh? For Turok 2, Seeds of Evil, they're taking us through level 20, the Elder God Shrine. Apparently, it's a tough one with loads of beasties to kill, mostly zombies, and ammo is tight. But if you're hard enough, you can reach level 24. They're showing us 3 secret areas in this level. Secret Area 1 involves jumping on a lift and going through windows for a health box. Sounds straightforward enough, doesn't it? Area 2 is in a maze. Look for a pentagram button to find a secret room full of zombies. Lovely. And Secret Area 3 is after Area 2. Step on a lift in the center, walk backwards through a teleport to get to level 24. Cheeky! Then it moves on to Shadow Man and level 21, the Palace of Hate, which apparently has 5 secret areas. They say the upper level is color-coded to help you navigate, but you'll still need a few goes to find your way around to get the silver key and avoid the guillotine. Charming. Secret Area 1, shoot a yellow symbol above a door. Area opens with a pentagram and a fiend. Area 2 is just going through a door into a healing pool. Easy peasy. Area 3, behind the pool, lift on the right, activate it, step under it for red armor bonus. Sorted. Area 4 is through the back entrance. Fight your way to the upper level, dead end with sliding walls, left-hand wall opens with a teleport. And finally, Secret Area 5, through that teleport, across sliding bridge, pentagram, rocket or grenade, jump under the teleport, to propel yourself through. Sounds like a bit of a faff, doesn't it? Still, secret areas are always good for bragging rights down the schoolyard, weren't they? This page in N64 Magazine is all about finding those sneaky hidden bits in Quake. Remember Quake? Proper dark and gothic, wasn't it? This is a how-to guide for every last secret in the game. Part 2 apparently, so they must have done a first part already. It's split into 2 levels. The Pain Maze, which they reckon is aptly named, and a bit of a pain especially if you bump into those Billy the Fish fellas. And Azure Agony, which they say is incredibly difficult. For the Pain Maze, there are 4 secret areas. They tell you how to get each one, like hitting a star button in the first room to get an elevator to a secret area, or jumping in a pool and surfacing in a small area to find a biosuit. For another one, you gotta shoot a green wall in a larger pool area to get to a pentagram classic Quake. And for the last one on that level, you need to ride a gold elevator and shoot a blue window on the ceiling. Simple, eh? Pen me. Then it moves on to Azure Agony, with a whopping 9 secret areas. They say to take out the fiends and knights and save the secrets for later. Good advice that. First secret is in a green dead end where you fall through a trapdoor. Another one involves looking for a ring of shadows and shooting a red button, typical cryptic Quake stuff. One of them needs you to shoot a wall to drop a quad damage and a vor. Oh, those were the days. And for another couple, you gotta shoot light patches on the walls for rockets. Then there's one where you drop into a pool, shoot a Q symbol, teleport, and come back to find a secret area. Finally, the last 3 are in a zombie-infested pool, where you shoot lights and jump across, and shooting walls reveals light and dark rooms. The dark room is worth 2 secret areas according to this. Clever stuff. Good luck remembering all that without scribbling it down. This page from N64 Mag is all about cheat and tips for Quake on the N64. Right then, level 24, the Nameless City. Apparently it's a proper maze full of zombies and fiends. They're showing you how to find 4 secret areas in this level. Secret Area 1 sounds like a bit of a faff with ramps and buttons to press to get a vor and some armor. Area 2 involves dropping into a pit with water to get a quad damage, which is always nice. Secret Area 3 is behind a gold door, involving water and a cage and a key. Sounds like classic Quake puzzling. Then Secret Area 4, you're back in the cage and teleporting to drop zombies into a pit. Bit sadistic that, eh? Then on to level 25, Shub-Niggurath's Pit, which only has 1 secret area. They reckon the first Shambler is the only enemy you actually need to kill, which is handy. It's all about getting past the Shamblers and Vores to get to Shub-Niggurath herself. To defeat her, you have to jump into her when this little spiky ball floats inside her. Sounds a bit gruesome if you ask me. Apparently, this secret area is on a ledge just before the teleport. They finish up saying Quake is deeply disturbing and needs psychotherapy and strong medication. Haha, bit strong maybe, but it was pretty intense for its time, wasn't it? They're already hyping up Quake 2 at the end there. Gotta love it. This page is all about tips and cheats for a couple of games. First up, it's Turok. Dinosaur Hunter, remember that one? They reckon it's had a price drop, so you might want to give it another look. Apparently it's still a decent first-person dino shooter, and has some of the best cheat menus around. They've got a bunch of cheat codes listed like NTH, GTH, DG, CRT, DTRK, which they call the big cheat for everything, and some other daft ones like LLTH, CLRS, FTHRNB for colorful effects, and CLLTH, TNMTN for quack mode, whatever that does. There are codes for showing enemies on the map, Dana mode, Spirit mode, a Robin cheat for invincibility and everything, a Greg cheat similar but without invincibility, unlimited ammo, credits, infinite lives, and even a pen and ink mode called DLKTDR to make the game black and white and line drawn, which sounds a bit odd. Then there's a bit about ISS 64, which they call a superlative football game. Bit strong maybe. They've got cheats for that too, hidden teams if you bash in a load of D-pad and button combos on the title screen, and another one to inflate the players' heads by tapping more D-pad and key button combos and start on the main screen. Apparently the announcer should shout "Goal!" if you do it right. Seems like the usual cheat code bonanza you'd expect back then. This page is all about readers' top tips, proper old school, innit? Looks like N64 Magazine trawled through loads of letters and picked the 10 best tips for the month. Seems like if your tip was top notch you could win a Macopad controller, remember those? Or at least a pin badge. Door. Right then. Tip number 1 is for GoldenEye 007, obviously. What else? It's about knowing where your opponent regenerates in deathmatch on the bunker level. They've listed where they pop up depending on how many times you've died. Died once, they are on the right stairs. Died twice, bunker 2 cell. You get the picture. Seems like if you learn the pattern you can just camp those spots and rack up the kills. Bit cheap, but hey, it's GoldenEye. You get it. Next up is Killer Instinct, talking about combos of course. Apparently ZBAL and ZBAR adds little goodies to your deathmatch. No idea what that means exactly, maybe extra damage or something? Then there are some codes for Gargos, ZAR, Z during story mode, and ZAB for colorful characters. Who even remembers Gargos now? Pongo. Tip 3 is for Top Gear Rally, showing you how to change the car color without going to the paint shop. Hold up or down on the D-pad to change the brightness, and left C, top C, or right C to mess with the colors. Fair enough if you are a stickler for car customization. Number 4 is Fighter's Destiny. When you are choosing your bloke, or bird, I suppose hold down Z and R, and apparently the character shouts, "Funky," and if you pick Pierre, the clown guy, and tap L loads, his nose gets bigger and then explodes. Right then. Vinay. FIFA. Road to World Cup 98 is tip number 5. It's about blocking the goalie's kick. In case you are a proper cheat, press B, just as the keeper is about to boot the ball, and apparently you can block it and leave an open goal. Proper naughty. 1080-degree snowboarding is number 6, with tips on turbo starts and landing jumps. Turbo start is pushing up on the stick when it says go, and to stop yourself wiping out on landings, adjust your board to be level with the ground and press Z. Helpful, I suppose, if you were still trying to master that game. Vodka. 7th tip is for FIFA again, this time World Cup 98. If you score a goal, apparently left C makes your player do some Italian-style whistling. Bit random, but alright. And if you concede, bottom C and B makes the crowd boo, while left C and A brings on cheering. For sound effects, basically. Yeah. GoldenEye 007 pops up again at number 8. This one is about easy kills in multiplayer, by using the analog stick to aim while holding left C and R, and apparently it's good for when opponents respawn in the air vent. Sounds a bit tryhard if you ask me. Foray. Wave Race 64 is number 9. Go to stunt mode, Dolphin Park level, do all the rings, then handstand, ride backwards, ride standing up, and backflip, all in order. If you do it right, you hear a dolphin squeak. And then, if you select your character holding down the analog stick, you'll be riding a dolphin. Never knew that, might have to give that a go. Lastly, number 10, Nagano Winter Olympics. Tip is, if you can't sleep, play Nagano Winter Olympics. Says it's the only good use for it. Ouch, harsh but fair maybe? Remember that game? Probably best forgotten. Word tips. And win a pin badge, or a macopad. Name, address, game name, and your tip. Standard stuff. They want you to cut it out, or photocopy it if you run out of room. Old school paper forms, those were the days. This page from the N64 Magazine, it's the tips section. You're through to the Nintendo. The Nintendo hotline. Those were the days before you could just look everything up online. You actually had to phone someone for help with games, probably cost a bomb for the call. Anyway, this page is all about Mystical Ninja starring Goemon. Remember that one? Proper bonkers Japanese game, stood out a mile on the N64, very different to your Mario and Zeldas. Looks like they're running through some of the common questions people were asking about Goemon. There's one about finding the meat saw hammer for Ebisumaru, that blue-haired fella, wasn't he? Another about getting the Medal of Flames, and how to level up your weapons, always useful. And then there's the classic, getting stuck behind a red door, this time near Ghost Toy's castle. The screenshots are a blast from the past, proper N64 fuzziness. But it had its own look, didn't it? They even mentioned Banjo-Kazooie, saying it's on the way, and it's worth waiting for. Everyone was massively hyped for Banjo-Kazooie back then. Rare were kings of the castle on the N64, weren't they? Good times, good times. This page, right then, it's a blast from the past, isn't it? Looks like one of those hotline pages from N64 Magazine, back when you had to actually phone someone if you were stuck in a game, rather than just looking it up online like you kids do now. Warrington, they're banging on about their expert games players, and how they can solve anything. Proper confidence trick they were running, but fair play, sometimes you were truly stumped. And look, they've even got an automated service now, automated phone help for games. Can you imagine? 50p a minute too. Bloody rip-off, but we probably still called them, didn't we? Anyway, the actual meat of the page is Tetrasphere Puzzle Solutions. Tetrasphere, remember that one? Bit of a weird Tetris spin-off for the N64. They've got a load of instructions here for puzzles 41 through to 52. Move the cursor here, grab that L-shaped thingy there, slide it about, press A. Standard puzzle game stuff, really. If you were stuck on Tetrasphere back in '98, this is where you'd look. Probably easier to just figure it out yourself, mind you. But there you go. Those were the days, eh? This page from N64 Magazine, takes me back. Looks like the letters page, Club 64, with some interesting stuff this month. First up is a letter called Swan Lake about football games and daft goal celebrations. Someone suggesting programmers should lighten up and have players do YMCA or even reveal pink bras when they score. Bit much, innit? Ed, the editor, seems a bit bemused by it too. Then there's a star letter about the N64's full potential. Jack Parrott reckons Nintendo should be pushing for more quality RPGs like on the SNES, saying he hasn't seen any good ones yet. Ed's response is reasonable, mentioning that it's still early days for the machine, and big developers like Rare, Namco and Capcom are still getting to grips with it, and that there are some RPGs coming later in the year like Zelda and Holy Magic Century. Fair enough. Bit weird is next, about a glitch in GoldenEye when using the all-weapons cheat. Player was bombing Baron Samedi but he just froze, even though the guards were still firing. Paused it to record it but then died when he unpaused. Classic GoldenEye oddness. Rare apparently said no comment when Ed asked them about it, unsurprisingly. Correction Corner is about mistakes in previous issues. Seems they got the Skill Club bronze certificate numbers wrong, and also messed up the name of a game from the Tokyo Game Show, calling it Top Skater instead of Air Border, which is apparently like Air Zyborder. Oops. Finally, there's a tally chart letter about GoldenEye again. Alex Thomas was playing Military Archives with Invincibility and counted faces, apparently saw 5 different types and 97 faces in total, 46 of which were the bloke with the scar. Dedicated or just bored? Probably both. And that's the letters page. Not a bad mix this month. A bit of GoldenEye chat as always, some RPG talk, and the usual magazine corrections. Takes me back to reading this while scoffing Monster Munch. Good times? This page from the magazine, right, let's have a gander. Up top there's a bit of a moan from a reader in 8 months, about the wait for 1080-degree snowboarding. Seems they're wondering why it takes so long to get games over here, even after translation, specifically from NTSC to PAL. The magazine's editor, Ed, basically says PAL conversion is a pain, and Japanese and American devs are slower than the likes of Rare at it. Remember all that PAL and NTSC telly rubbish back then? What a faff. Then there's a bit called Big-Headed, where someone's asking about the name of that big-headed bloke from previous issues. Typical reader questions, really. The fact box is interesting. It's all about carts versus CDs, a proper hot topic back then, wasn't it? They're asking why Nintendo stuck with cartridges when CDs were becoming all the rage with the PlayStation. The mag reckons it was to cut down on loading times. Remember how long PlayStation games could take to load? And cartridges were meant to be better against piracy too, apparently. Plus, saves on carts with batteries, rather than memory packs, always felt a bit more reliable, didn't they? They also touch on game size, saying PlayStation games weren't actually that much bigger than N64 games. In terms of pure game data, it was all the extra full motion video and fancy intros that bloated them out. Think of Croc on the PlayStation compared to Mario 64, size-wise, makes sense. Dogen games. Cost is mentioned too. CDs were much cheaper to make, pennies compared to pounds for carts. That's why N64 games were pricier, and maybe why some developers were a bit hesitant. Risk of failure and all that, cheaper to take a gamble on the PlayStation. But overall the mag concludes both carts and CDs had their ups and downs, and N64 just preferred the ease of carts and the hardware stability, even if PlayStation drives could be a bit dodgy with wear and tear. Pretty balanced view, I suppose. Warrington Dorcas. Down at the bottom there's a section called Dream Mon, and it's game ideas from readers. First up is a James Bond RPG idea. Sounds like a bit of a laugh. Starting in London, getting missions, even gambling and girls and fistfights, all very Bond. The other one is Animal World 64, about playing as an animal in a 3D world. Picking from loads of animals, exploring city areas, avoiding cars and chasing cats. Sounds a bit bonkers, but kind of intriguing in a weird way. Editor Ed has a bit of a sarcastic comment at the end of each, naturally. Yep, typical N64 mag page, really. This page of N64 Magazine has a letters section called Bonus Letters, and a Q&A section called So Tell Me This. In the Bonus Letters section, readers are writing in about all sorts. Someone's giving Shigsy stick about his hair looking like a wig, which is a bit cheeky. There's a question about cheat codes for Space Invaders on the Atari 2600. A bit retro, even for 98. One fella is complaining about Amber from Blastcore always saying suggestive things, which is a bit of a laugh. Someone else feels sick playing Turok, and Ed's reply is spot on, telling him he should have got GoldenEye instead. Cheeky. There's a funny one about a photo looking like it's from Playgirl magazine. And someone moans about being a slow typer. Then there's a letter saying, FIFA 98 is better than ISS 64. Ed finds that hard to believe, and I'd have to agree with Ed there. ISS 64 was something else. Finally, someone admits their fat and dumplings taste nice, and Ed just decides to leave it at that, probably best. Then there's, so tell me this, which is the questions page. Bart from Belgium wants to know if there will ever be a light gun on the N64, which was a fair question at the time. We were all hoping for more light gun action after Time Crisis in the arcades. Mercier Peter is asking about Bond engine game in the Ultra release list and when Duck Hunt's coming to the N64. They are talking about Perfect Dark, referring to it as the sequel to GoldenEye using the same engine, and saying there's no Bond in it anymore. They say Capcom are signed up to produce N64 games, and will be showing their plans at E3. For the questions from Gary and Inverness about V-Rally 64 and Mission Impossible, they mention that Mission Impossible is a bit like GoldenEye but not really, and that most missions are timed, which sounds a bit stressful. Adam from Hertfordshire asks about Quake 2 Dead or Alive, and Mortal Kombat 4 coming to the N64. They confirm Quake 2 is coming, Dead or Alive is unlikely, and Mortal Kombat 4 is due this summer, but they warn not to get too hyped about the PlayStation version being awful. And lastly, someone is asking if ISS 98 has an official license, and if the 64DD will improve things. Lastly, there's a bit called Kent, with a picture of a Mario Gents hairdresser. The reader, William, found it in Kent and thought it was funny, especially as there was also a Luigi's further down the road. Ed jokes about getting his haircut there, but then thinks better of it. A bit random, but that's magazines for you. This page from the N64 Magazine, back in '98, features a few sections. Up top in Invention Corner, there's a look at some madcap contraptions. First up, the Dream Gun, which is a light gun and joypad combo, priced at 35 quid, a fiver more than a normal N64 pad apparently. The reviewer reckons it lets you move your character in Time Crisis, and even GoldenEye, which sounds a bit ambitious for the time, but hey, maybe it was alright. Pry to. Then there's classy glasses, for 2 to 4 player gaming. These are basically glasses that only let you see your quarter of the screen, a way to stop screen cheating in GoldenEye deathmatches apparently. Sounds a bit daft, but I guess it was a solution to the age-old problem of peering at your mate's screen. Over on the right is the N64 board, which is the Reader's Art and Letters section. It's got a bunch of reader drawings pinned up like a notice board. There's Ninja Pikachu from Jason Harper in Norfolk, a lovely Link drawing sent in by David Mechanic from Edinburgh, and a Linda with her snowboard picture from Lewis Hood in Hornchurch. There's also a N64 team cartoon, with different characters labelled as Agent James, Mrs. Bell, Proud Owner Paul, Delivery Boy Jess and so on, plus a Yoshi drawing and a globe picture saying the magazine is the best in the world, drawn by readers from various places. Down below in questions, our crew from Anglesey is asking about N64 graphics and sound. Daniel McDonough from Northern Ireland wants to know about Ghoul and Ghosts, and tennis from Ubisoft. And James Garrity from Liverpool is asking about a Championship Premier Manager game for the N64. The answers are a bit vague, saying Ghoul and Ghosts might appear. Tennis is tentatively titled Tennis Arena for the PlayStation, and Premier Manager on the N64 sounds unlikely. Regarding the Top Gear Rally question, it mentions there's a gap filler between Top Gear Rally and its 64DD sequel, and an in-between game being developed for the cartridge. They also talk about how back when N64 was new, someone from the magazine visited Capcom in Japan and saw ghouls being run. So standard magazine fare, answering reader questions and showcasing their drawings. This page is a subscription advert for N64 Magazine. Right there at the top in big red letters it shouts, "Subscribe to N64 Magazine, can't miss that, can you?" There's a picture of Link, from Zelda, wielding his sword, which is classic N64 era stuff. Everyone was mad for Ocarina of Time back then. No. Then it shows a few of the magazine covers stacked up. You can see Gex 64, remember that gecko? Bit of a wisecracking platformer, wasn't it? And Turok 2. Dinosaur Hunter, that was a pretty big deal. Dinosaurs and guns, always a winner. Oh, and Blastcore, with the robot, that was a weird one. A bit different, smashing buildings up. It's pushing you to subscribe, saying you get 14 issues for the price of 12, which is alright, and if you pay by direct debit, you save a bit more, and get another couple of issues free, so 4 free issues in total. Plus, they'll deliver it to your door for free, in the UK no penny charged, which is a bonus. And you get a double game guide chucked in, full of tips and cheats for a couple of top games, delivered with every issue. Sounds like they're trying to tempt you, doesn't it? Down in the corner there's the phone number to call to subscribe, a fax number, remember fax machines, and an email address if you're feeling modern. And at the bottom, it's got the prices, £29 for direct debit, £33.40 if you pay by cheque or credit card, and then Europe and the rest of the world prices. Standard stuff for a magazine subscription page back then, really. This page in N64 Magazine back in '98, it's all about getting a job in the video games industry, which was probably something a few of us were actually dreaming about at the time. It's got this slightly naff-looking board game mock-up called Game for Life to illustrate the idea. The article talks about how the games industry is booming, even more so than films apparently, and that there are loads of different jobs going, not just making the games themselves but marketing, selling, and writing about them too. It mentions programmers, artists, musicians, producers, and even journalists. They're painting a picture of it being a pretty good career path, saying programmers are like code monkeys. A bit of a backhanded compliment there, maybe, but highly sought after and well paid compared to some boring office job. It also mentions the hours can be long and it's competitive, but ultimately rewarding if you're passionate about games. They even say that the satisfaction is often better than just the cash, which is a nice thought, even if we all secretly hoped for both. And it finishes with a bit of a call to action to turn the page and find out more about job cards, which is a typical magazine trick to keep you reading. It's all pretty optimistic stuff, trying to tempt us away from the usual humdrum jobs and into the exciting world of video games. Whether it actually worked for many of us is another question entirely, mind. This page delves into the world of getting a job in the games industry, back when it was still a bit of a mysterious career path for most of us. It's talking about being a programmer and a musician/sound effects artist, which were definitely the cool jobs everyone dreamed of doing back then. For programmers, it paints them as these misunderstood geniuses who turn crazy ideas into actual games. They're saying it's all about C or C++ languages, and that PlayStation programmers were hot stuff. Which was true, PlayStation was king at the time. The start salary for a junior programmer is mentioned as being between £14,000 to £18,000, and you could climb up to £35,000, £50,000 as a technical manager. Sounds alright, doesn't it? Though London prices were already mental, even back then, so maybe not enough to buy a mansion. Boring, comma. Then there's the musician and sound effects artist. They call it the oft-overlooked role of the piano man. Bit dramatic, that. But yeah, sound was getting more important in games then. They quote some fella called Furk, an anonymously named artist, saying audio is a small part of the industry but has a big impact, and another bloke, Bjorn Lynn, recommending knowing your stuff about games and music. Salaries were similar-ish to programmers, starting at £14,000, £18,000 for an inexperienced musician, and going up to £28,000 for experienced ones. Probably still not rockstar money. Brinnini. The bottom of the page has a section about learn the trade. It's saying experience is key, but a degree can help. It mentions the University of Abertay Dundee as being the first place in the UK to offer a games course, and DigiPen over in the States. There are these very 90s looking website screenshots for both universities. They reckon these courses aren't essential, but they can help you get your foot in the door. DigiPen was apparently getting loads of applications, about 1,000 for only 100 places. Sounds like getting into Oxbridge but for games. Shows how popular it was becoming, even then. This page is all about getting into the games industry, proper jobs for proper gamers, not just bedroom coders anymore. First up, there's a piece about being a games artist. Apparently it's not just lobbing pixels around anymore. You've got to actually make things look like cars and stuff. They're talking about using 3D Studio Max, which was a big deal on PCs back then, and Silicon Graphics workstations for the serious stuff. Starting salary for a junior artist was around £14,000 to £18,000, rising to £23,000 to £35,000 for a senior bod. Not bad money if you could draw spaceships all day. Then there's games testing, or games tester. They're making it sound almost glamorous, not just some monkey boy finding bugs. Though, let's be honest, it mostly was. They mention starting at the QA stage, quality assurance, checking the games work on all sorts of PCs, pays a bit less, £10,000 to £13,000, and they say it's a stepping stone to other departments. Jim McDonough from Ubisoft is quoted, moaning about playing World Cup '98 all day. Poor bloke. And Dean Murphy from EA is in there too, talking about long hours and learning the industry. Sounds like hard graft, but maybe a foot in the door. Finally, there's an article called Nab That Job, which is all about getting your foot in the door in the industry. They reckon game testing is a good way in for programmers. Marketing and PR roles are pitched at graduates, and apparently, being friendly helps. They suggest looking in magazines like N64 Mag and the CTW, Computer Trade Weekly. Cold calling companies is mentioned, and they even name Electronic Arts as always expanding. They say you need a demo, not just a CV. Good advice actually. may I? Down the bottom there's a little bit about the CTW, something about a dream machine emerges, with logos for Sega, Infogrames, and EA. Looks like news about the Dreamcast, with mentions of EA sticking close to Sony and Euroboost for PC games. Standard industry waffle really. And there's a picture of some Japanese dolls, bit random that. Oh, and a reminder to throw a 2, ORA 1 and go. Go to next page. Bit childish for my liking, even back then. This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at jobs in the games industry, which back then seemed like a proper dream job, didn't it? First off, they're looking at producers who they describe as basically the top dog, in charge of everything. Hiring, firing, the whole shebang. Apparently you could kick off on about 16 grand as an assistant, and maybe work your way up to 80 grand if you were a proper hotshot, plus the usual bonuses, company cars, stock options, all that jazz. Then it's marketing, which they reckon is all about splashing cash to flog games, shoving adverts in magazines and PC World, that kind of palaver. Marketing assistant started at 20 grand, and you could climb to 75 grand as a director, not to be sniffed at. Apparently you needed to be decent at English, and have a strong personality for marketing, sounds about right. And then there's this competition, the Games Developer UK thing, trying to unearth fresh blood. Scottish developers were involved, searching for programmers, artists, soundboards, game designers, the works. $1 grand in cash for each category winner, and $5 grand for the best overall entry. They're name-dropping VIS, DMA, and inner workings as potential employers. If you were dreaming of knocking out a game like Body Harvest, this competition was supposed to be your big break. Deadline was end of June for applications and end of August to hand in your masterpiece. Website was there too, www.gduk.co.uk. Looks like they were really pushing Body Harvest, showing a screenshot of it as well. This page has a look at a few career paths in the games industry. It starts off with PR, explaining it's not really about dealing with the public, more about schmoozing journalists, which, let's be honest, probably hasn't changed much. Apparently back then you could start as a PR executive on around 18 to 23 grand plus a company car, rising to potentially 25 grand plus benefits as a PR manager. They reckon it's all about being nice to journalists, which, yeah, sounds about right. Make it do. Then it moves on to being a journalist. They paint it as the opposite end of the social spectrum to PR, which is a bit dramatic, isn't it? Starting salary for a staff writer was supposedly 10 to 14 grand, and you could maybe get to 25 to 35 grand as a senior editor. They mention freelancing could earn you between 15 and 20 grand. They do say it can be soul destroying, getting your words hacked to pieces by editors, which, again, sounds familiar. Finally, there's retail buyer. This is about deciding which games your shop stocks. Starting salary is apparently 16 grand as a buyer, rising to 30 to 35 grand plus a car and benefits as a senior buyer. They say the only real risk is ordering too many copies of a duff game. Which is fair enough, nobody wants to be stuck with shelves full of Wheel of Fortune if it doesn't sell, although I don't remember that being a massive hit on the N64. There's also a bit at the bottom called Don't Give Up, with some generic advice about enjoying yourself and getting paid for it. It suggests learning skills, writing about games, and approaching companies, saying enthusiasm is key. Good luck to anyone trying to break into the industry, eh? Always sounds easier on paper. This page is a coming soon for issue 18 of N64 Magazine, and blimey, it's all about Banjo-Kazooie, isn't it? The big bear and bird are plastered all over the page, looking quite pleased with themselves, and rightly so. It was shaping up to be massive back then. They're promising it's going to be the only game that matters that summer, and they'll have absolutely everything you need to know about Rare's blockbuster. There's a little text box saying it's going to have even more on the games that were at E3, plus more on Perfect Dark and Jet Force Gemini, and they're banging on about reviews of every N64 game released in Europe, Japan or America, plus loads of new tips and cheats. Standard magazine fare really to get you to buy the next issue. There you are. On the right hand side, there's an index for the current issue, issue 17. Flipping through that, you've got Aero Gauge Review, which was alright if you were into your futuristic races. An Englishman in Tokyo sounds a bit random, wonder what that was about. Bomberman Hero Review Classic Series, always good for a laugh. Buck Bumble Preview, another one trying to be a bit different, think it had bees or something. Dual Heroes Review, never played that one myself, wasn't meant to be up to much from what I remember. Then there's a E3 show report, which would have been the big talking point at the time, seeing what was coming out. Warrant, eager waiting. High Speed. I bet that's about F-Zero X, that was a proper Speed Freaks game. Ear to the ground, probably just news and gossip. Extreme G2 Preview. Another futuristic racer. They were everywhere, weren't they? Forsaken How To. Probably tips for that shoot 'em up. Game for Life feature sounds a bit grand. Glover preview. The one with the glove, yeah, quirky. GT64 review. Was that proper Gran Turismo on the 64? Nah, probably not as good. Hybrid Heaven preview. That wrestling RPG thing? That was a weird one. Jet Force Gemini future look. Yeah, that was a big deal. Rare were on fire back then. Kobe Bryant's NBA courtside review. If you were into basketball games. Legend of Zelda 64 preview. Obviously that's Ocarina of Time, the big one everyone was waiting for. Warren 64 contact letters page probably. Paul's Plant, no idea. Perfect Dark / GoldenEye 2 Special Investigation. Ooh, sounds intriguing. Planet 64 Information Station, Bits and Bobs. Pocket Monsters Stadium preview. Pokemon Stadium to us, and, you know, the kids were mad for Pokemon. Power Pro Baseball V review, another sports game. Quake How To, probably tips and cheats for Quake 64. Retro World, probably a look back at older games. RPG News, Shadowman preview. That was dark, bit different. Skill Club 64. Space Circus future look, no idea what that is. Star Soldier preview, classic shooter. Subscriptions. Tips Extra. Turok 2 future look that was supposed to be a bit tasty graphically. Ultra release list, probably just upcoming games. Virtual sexuality news, sounds dodgy. WC, W vs NWO How To. Wrestling tips I guess. W vs WF, Warzone preview. Winback preview. Wipeout preview, loads of previews in this issue. World Cup 98 How To. Football game tips. Christ, they crammed a lot in, didn't they? And at the bottom it says, the Ursine edition of N64 Magazine will be on sale Wednesday the 15th of July. Ursine edition playing on the Bear from Banjo-Kazooie, get it? Clever lads.